And the counselor clears him to go back to work. And 3 months later, he's suicidal. And because of a couple of situations that happened that caused some triggering events that caused him to have to go back to that moment. Not the fact that he killed the guy, but the fact that he couldn't save the child.
Hey, welcome back, everyone. My guest this time spent almost 40 years in law enforcement. Over 30 of those years were with LAPD. He did a couple short stints with the University of Texas and Cal State LA, where he retired as a chief. He gave the private sector a try, but that really wasn't a good fit for his family. Besides consulting work, he's been teaching suicide by cop classes since 2020. And today he primarily focuses on that aspect. Besides the de-escalation component that he teaches to law enforcement, he's also addressing the mental health aspects related to officers dealing with not just suicide by cop, but shootings in general. This was an interesting conversation, so let's get into it. Here's episode 144 with Rick Wall.
My class, I think the suicide by cop class, we've been teaching it since 2020, and we've taught over 250 classes, over 10,000 officers in 15 states. We've had people from all 50 states, and several countries have attended our online class, and so it's kind of interesting there. But we've had 20 people come up. We do a lot on wellness. We've had 20 people come up to us after class, either reach out to me or one of the other instructors, say, "Hey, I've been thinking of killing myself," and we've been able to link them with services. That's a huge win.
The one positive thing to that is we all know the typical first responder. The last thing they're ever going to do is
call for help,
ask for help.
Right.
And so just by simply being there and you break that barrier to, oh, wait, I can just walk up after class. Or now I've made a connection with the person and it's easier to go, hey, can I talk to you for a second? So just those little things are what push it forward.
We had an interesting class in Beaumont, and there was a bunch of folks from a bunch of agencies, right? And one of the, we were talking about TBI, specifically blast TBI, the concussive wave from explosions. Helmets don't help. Other things don't, ears don't help, but because it's a shockwave goes through your head. And as we were talking about it, I could see a guy in the back of the class starting to have, emote. You could see there was something going on. So I kind of went over and talked to him. I was like, "Hey, you okay?" He goes, I was a tanker. It was inside a tank. It's loud, but you don't get the concussive wave because you're inside the tank. But if you're outside a tank, when another one fires, it's pretty significant. He goes, and I've been to the VA a number of times. I've been to counselors a number of times. I've been contemplating suicide for about 2 years, and now I think I know what's wrong with me. Big win.
So before we get into all that,
sure,
let's take it backwards, give everybody the dollar tour. So for you, where's hometown? Where'd you grow up?
I was a Navy brat, so I grew up all over the world. Mostly, I was born in Florida, grew up in the South. My dad kept different bases throughout the South, lived in Guam. And then after second grade, third grade, we moved to California. My dad went to the Naval Postgraduate School, and we lived in Carmel. Went to the mission, and then
horrible place to grow up.
Well, it could be worse. And then we moved to Coronado, and lived in Coronado for a couple more years, and they couldn't see spending $30,000 for a house in Coronado, so they bought a larger house in South San Diego for $32,000 or $28,000. So a couple of years later, obviously, the Coronado house is worth millions.
Yeah, I was going to say, but people listening today is like,
so did that. Ended up going to school, San Diego State, and dabbled with, tried to play football. Didn't work out. Was doing business management, And
military not on your radar coming out of high school?
I was looking at that, but part of I wanted to be a pilot. My dad was a Navy pilot, did 3 tours in Vietnam. But I'm too tall. I'm 6'6", and my seating height is over 36 inches. So, and helicopters was an option, but post Vietnam, there was a surplus of helicopter pilots that stayed within the range, the height range, and so a tall guy just wasn't going to happen. You look at what was it? We were soldiers. You're too tall, right? It gets in, but that wasn't going to be me. So, and then doing some other stuff, and then one day I was talking to a guy about joining the Los Angeles Police Department. And I thought that'd be fun. Let me do that. I'd be 20 years from now. I'd hate to say, I wonder what would have happened if. And as it happened, my uncle was a captain with the LAPD at the time. So I applied to LAPD. I literally got a call.
So you hadn't looked at law enforcement, hadn't even considered law enforcement before that?
No, not really. Just thought, okay, that's kind of cool. So I got a call on the Friday Memorial Day weekend that there's a class starting on Tuesday. They had a cancellation. Are you available? And I lived in San Diego. I'm like, yep. So I turned to my boss, who knew I was in the process anyway, and said, hey, I'm thinking of going. He said, I got this offer. He goes, okay. So we had lunch. They offered me a couple promotions and stuff to stay, but I'm like, I just got to do this.
What year is this when you're going in?
1980. And so 39 years later, I retired as the chief of police at Cal State LA. I worked over 30 years with LAPD, retired as a captain 2, and then went to the private sector for a couple years, worked for one of the studios, had a blast, had a great time. And I was in New Orleans for like 3 weeks for Super Bowl 47. And when I came home, my wife's like, is this really what we want to do? You're going to work before the kids are up. You're coming home after they're in bed. And they were 3 years old at the time, like my triplets. And, you're not seeing your kids. You're around on weekends, but you're always busy. Is this really what your retirement gig was supposed to be? And she's the brains of the operations. It's like, I figured it out, and I'm like, you're right. This isn't what I want.
So you did 30 years with LAPD?
Yeah, just a little over 30. Oh, actually 35, because I did some reserve time afterwards too.
With LAPD, do you basically kind of hit your max as far as retirement, or can you keep going?
So LAPD maxes out now at 90%, and that's 33 years. Then they also have the drop. The demon drop, the temptress drop, as I refer to it, where you can retire, collect your pension into account while you're still getting paid your full salary. But I always tell people, have a plan. I can tell you from working as a chief and as a some other things, I get calls.
Pull that microphone just a little bit closer to your mouth. There you go.
I get calls all the time from guys saying, hey, I'm retired. My time's up in a couple weeks and I don't have a job and I'm hiring. I'm like, dude, you need to pre-plan. So I tell people, if you're going to go to the drop, have a plan. If you're going to do something else, you need to do that within 3 years, because 5 years is going to disappear fast. If you don't have a plan, if your plan is just retire, cool, ride it out. But don't just go in there thinking I'm going to make all this money. I tell people that everybody I know who was on drop, I can think of 3 that I know, and I'm sure there's others that have actually touched that money. And I'm talking millions of dollars in some cases. I'm talking guys with well over $1 million in their deferred comp, and they've never touched it because you've got a good pension. You're still, by the time you walk out the door, you've generally got your house paid off or you're close to it. You've got all those things done. And your cost of living, your expenses aren't what they were. So what are you going to do with your money? And so I we talk about that a lot. But yeah, I did. So I was retired, I think, at like 80%.
Going back to the start of your career, when you first started, was promoting what you wanted to do, or did that kind of come later in your career?
It came along. I didn't envision myself reaching. My uncle was a captain. I said, okay, I'd like to do that. I'd like to at least hit that mark at some point if it's in the cards. I had a blast. I was having, and I was very fortunate that things just fell into my lap a lot of times. I worked patrol, and then I was an instructor at the academy for a little while. I did a couple other things. I got hurt pretty badly, major, pretty bad head injury, loss of vision for a while. I mean, I was pretty jacked up, and we had a wellness guy.
How did that injury happen?
Fighting a couple of bad guys. I survived the fight. At one point, one of the suspects, I lost my gun in the fight because I got hit in the back of the head with a 2x4, fell to the ground. I'm plain clothes, not uniform. And I'm on the ground, and one guy's punching me in the face. The other guy's trying to pry the gun out of my hand. And I'm losing consciousness. I can feel this is not going to end well. So it's Beretta 92F. So my plan is eject the magazine, fire the one round, and then if I lose the weapon, hopefully they don't know how to put it back together. Every time I hit the eject, it reseated, slammed on the ground and reseated. I'm like, damn. So finally, I realized I don't have the gun. I hear a gunshot, and I don't have the gun. And one of the suspects has it. So I've got one guy on my chest punching me in the face, broke my nose in 3 places. So the other guy puts the gun to my head. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you. I tried to reach. I couldn't see. I got blood in my eyes. My vision's going because of the head injury. So I'm like, okay. So I just put both my hands by my head. Just said, hey, I'm cool. I'm cool. Just go. Just leave. And when he put the gun to my head, I was hoping for the contact shot. When he put the gun to my head, I was able to grab it. And as I turned my head, he pulled the trigger, so I got a permanent hearing loss in my left ear. Round went down range. We were brand new to the autoloaders, so nobody expected. In fact, they didn't believe. They had to go out and test it. I had such a firm grip that it prevented it from cycling, because the myth is it would tear up your hand or something. Well, no, if you're holding it onto it hard enough, it didn't.
Do you remember the flip side to that, though? The guys that used to do the demonstrations where they would grab in front and with the Beretta, with the takedown lever, right, pull the slide in the barrel right off the gun?
And that's exactly. So while I'm holding the gun, now I'm trying to, I could hit the button, but I couldn't hit the decocker switch, because that was my plan. I was trying to take it off, because that'd give me a nice 2.5 pound piece of metal with a jagged edge, but I couldn't hold on to the gun. I started losing consciousness again. I knocked the one guy off of me, charged the guy that I believed had the gun, heard a click, click, which I now know was him pulling the trigger twice. They knocked me to the ground again. They took off. I saw him throw the gun. I went and recovered the gun, went to a house, said, hey, the front door was open. They had a screen door on. I said, hey, can you call the police? I'm a police officer. Like,
you are the police.
How do I know you're the police? I'm like, I got a gun in my hand. I'm bleeding. Trust me, I'm a police. Call them, tell them, So as I'm kind of staggering, waiting I see them get into a car. And it was weird with my vision. I could close my eyes, and if I opened them, I could see for just a fraction of a second. So I got close enough, closed my eyes, open it, got the plate. And a couple of other people start coming out. I tell one of them, write down this plate, write down this license plate. The car takes off, blows a red light. Police car pulls right in behind him. I'm like, cool, they're going to get him. And then I see the brake lights come on, the nosedive. I'm like, the help call just came out. And anyway, they got the guys a couple days later. Got one in San Pedro. They got the other guy in Cleveland. He saw the first guy get arrested and realized they were in trouble.
Trying to get out of Dodge.
So they ended up going to prison for that one. But
what kind of case was it originally that you were out on?
There was a robbery that I just happened to stumble into. It was just one of those.
Wrong place at the right time?
For somebody. But anyway, long story short, getting back to, so I got hurt, and we had a wellness guy, Frank Vergalito. And if you were off for any extended period of time, he worked directly for Chief Gates. He would come visit you. So he came and visited me till my vision came back, and then he checked in on me from time to time. And then Thanksgiving Day, I get a phone call from Chief Gates. I'd spoken to him a couple times, but it didn't sound like him. Hey, this is Chief Gates. Yeah, right. Who is this? Rick, this is Chief Gates. I said, look, I don't have time for this bullshit. Who is this? Listen to my voice. This is Chief Gates. Yes, sir. What are you doing Monday? Hopefully I'm still working for the Los Angeles Police Department. He says, yeah, you are. Can you meet in my office Monday morning? I said, actually, sir, I'm going to be in Phoenix. I could be there Monday afternoon, Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Yes, sir. Can I ask what this is about? You can ask. Happy Thanksgiving. See you later. I see you Tuesday. I'm like, and so I get there, find out I've been selected to work by the chief. He had a special unit, at the time was called Inspection and Control. and they handled investigations that were so sensitive that he didn't even trust internal affairs with them. It was, he handpicked a team of folks to do these investigations, and I happened to be part of that team.
Internal investigations, but of a higher level?
Yeah. This was a big one. It was on the heels of the sheriff's narcotics scandal.
Okay.
So there were some issues going on within LAPD narcotics that he wanted to look at. And it was interesting because the way that
Just briefly, though, for those listening who don't know the history of Southern California law enforcement, this was a large narcotics team for the sheriff's department who was, in the easiest way, taking cash and dope.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stealing more cash than dope. But
right.
Yeah, and buying houses and buying boats and buying all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, not living under the radar.
Yeah, and the way it came out was during a divorce. One of the wives said, "Well, you've got this other undeclared income," and then all of a sudden everything just blew up on them. So anyway, long story short, that's what I did. Did that with a team of folks.
How long were you off for with the injury? Like from that Thanksgiving?
For about 3.5 months. And then I was light duty for another several months after that. I probably would have been light duty longer than I was, but you know how it is. I'm fine.
I'm good.
So anyway, long story short, did that investigation. That was a very interesting one.
How many years in are you at this point?
8 years. So in fact, it was funny because I was on the detective list. I was also on the sergeant's list. And I walked in and they sent me down to position control. The LAPD is to control all the promotions and everything. And I walked in, they handed me a detective badge, and it was an old badge because all the new ones were 2200 series, and this was a 1436 was my badge number. And I'm like, they go, "Chief wants you to be a detective today. He's promoting out. You're going to be promoted in 2 weeks, but he wants you to have a detective badge today, be a detective today. And he wants you to look like an older badge so it doesn't look like you're a brand new guy because what you're going to be doing." But we never recorded anything. We would sit down with people just like this and say, anything we talk about is between you, me, and the chief. So
were you more of an intelligence team?
I just say investigations would probably be, but could be. I did some stuff like that later on in my career. I mean, just like I said, I just fell into things that were just, really cool. But anyway, long story short, did that, made detective, made sergeant. And then, so at one point I played volleyball, and we were going to go to Russia and play volleyball and on a sister city exchange with St. Petersburg. It was right after the wall fell, and there was a lot of stuff going on with organized crime. So I got a call from one of the captains that I knew from this other assignment who was at organized crime. He said, "Hey, here's some people I'd really like you to talk to while you're there. Here's some stuff I'd like to get figured out, and we want to get an idea what the Russian organized crime is going to look like when it hits the United States, because it's coming." So I played volleyball and went out drinking with the guys and would meet with these people at these different locations that we were at, and it was pretty fun. It was funny because our first night we were there, we had one of our handlers. His name was Nick. We had two handlers, Nikolai and Misha. And so we're in the bar having a cocktail. So we just finished dinner and we're just decompressing after our flight. And Nick comes over to me and says, "These girls, that your guys are dancing with, they are crocodiles." Crocodiles. They get paid for sex. You mean prostitutes? Oh yes, prostitutes. So if one of the guys wants to take a girl back to his room, let me know, and I'll put a policeman outside, because they usually rob them and then run out the hall naked, and they don't know that no one's going to chase them.
Right.
I said, "I don't think we'll be needing that, but I appreciate that." So bar closes. Misha says, "Hey, there's a private club upstairs we can go to." I said, "Okay, cool, let's go." So I guess, and Nick's kind of like, so we go up and it's the knock at the door, the speakeasy kind of thing, the set of eyes, and they're speaking Russian, obviously. And so, okay, and closes another open set of eyes, the door opens up, we walk in, there's all these guys, thugs, the sideways noses, the leather jackets, and all the crocodiles are in there too. And I'm just like, oh, this is not a good place to be. So we had a beer, And then Nick says, we need to leave. I said,
when in Russia, do as the Russians do.
When we were in uniform, we'd go to big events in uniform. They'd break out the vodka bottles. And that's what you do. So we'll go down back to our room, and there's a knock at the door, and it's Nick. And he says, can we talk? I said, yeah, sure. So come on in. So my roommate was there, and we're talking, and he says, he goes, can I trust him? I said, yeah, I trust him. He says, I've always suspected that Misha was mafia. Tonight I know. And that became my first contact into being able to talk to people about the Russian mafia and who was working things and stuff. And so it was pretty interesting. So I wrote a white paper on it, and who knows what happened to it.
How long did you end up spending there?
We were only there for about 3 weeks. But the funny thing was, after I retired, I was at police headquarters, and there was a detective who was working organized crime, and we walked down, we'd pass each other, hey, how you doing? And when he stopped, he goes, this is the guy. And I go, look, what? And he says, when you came back from Russia, you wrote that paper, and I read that paper. And everything you talked about, we're investigating today. Because, it's all the stuff you said. It's like, okay, it's easy to figure stuff out, right? You talk to people and just say, hey, this is what's happening. So I got to do that.
What year was that?
It was right after the wall fell. So I want to say I was a sergeant. It was late 80s, early 90s, maybe late 80s. Then it was right after the riots in 92. So did that. I was able to go to England on a Fulbright. Spent a lot of time there doing stuff, and I led a very charmed career. Think about it. I was there for the Olympics. I was there for the riots. I was assigned to one of the Pope details on one occasion at Dodger Stadium. The North Hollywood shootout. I was there, but everybody was there. I wasn't a shooter. I was just, the DNC riots, the real LA riots. So just things were happening that were there. I worked with guys that were just legends within LAPD. As my training officers, one of the guys I worked with was the guy who was a probationer who jumped over the wall at the loud radio call that turned out to be the Sharon Tate murder. So talking to these guys about the history of LAPD was good. And ultimately, my degrees, I went back to school after a while. I got a bachelor and master's in history. They said, if you want to promote, you should probably get an advanced degree. And I didn't, an MBA just didn't appeal to me. So did that, worked up. Again, a lot of great assignments, had a lot of fun, good gig. And then it was time to go.
Going back to what you said before, and you were talking about having, especially if you're going to go into the drop program, but I do believe that regardless, if you're going to the drop program, you need to be thinking about your transition. Hence the reason for this podcast.
Right.
Before you come to the end of the ride, were you already thinking about what you were going to do? And when did, I guess, going backwards, what was the catalyst to get you thinking about it? And was it a mentor who mentored you to start thinking about life afterwards, or did it just come to you on your own?
It just kind of came to me on my own. I kept seeing people who were retiring and not having a plan. Hey, I'm going to start a security business, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to be a PI. And okay, great. Well, you can't do that the day you retire. Those are things you need to build for years before you retire to be ready, so that when you retire, it's not, okay, now what am I going to do? Because you don't have your clients, you don't have the connections you had, you don't have a lot of things you don't have because you're not on the inner circle anymore. You're not one of the guys anymore. So I got a PI license, and I got a PPO, private patrol operator, so I could run a security company. So I had my own security company.
And back then, LAPD still allowed you to have a side business of a security company, correct?
Still does.
Oh, okay.
The one that became ugly was the PI license. And it was interesting because that was, I want to say Pelicano was the famous attorney, might have been, and I may have got the name wrong, but he had hired an LAPD guy, officer sergeant, to access databases for his PI business. And when that came down, they said, "Oh, this is bad. So you can't have a PI license. If you can't run a PI business as a police officer." First, it was like, well, there's only a couple people that have them, me and one other guy. And then somebody did a BSIS, Bureau of Security Investigative Services check, and found that there was a lot of LAPD folks that had them. Most guys just had them and just tucked them away and figured, well, I'll have it when I retire. But so I got mine, and so then there was like, okay, well, you can't have them anymore. And my argument was, the people who have the licenses aren't the guys that are doing the illegal stuff. The guys who have the licenses want to protect that license because that's going to be their retirement gig down the road. So they said, you can't have it. And I said, okay. So I went to the assistant chief and said, hey, look, what if I just put it inactive? Because that way, if I give up the license, I have to take the test and all that stuff again. Whereas if I just make it inactive, I can't use it. And so I called BSIS and they said, interesting, let's take a look at that. So they said, yes. So they created a status of inactive. So my PI license was inactive, even though I still had my PPO, ran a security company, did a lot of stuff for different celebrities and VIPs. And, we had off-duty folks at their houses or driving them around or doing whatever. Did that for a while. When I left LAPD in 2011, I went to the private sector and I was working, for one of the studios, like as I mentioned, and I didn't. My wife was running the business, and it was like, we don't need to do this anymore.
Were you contracting yourself to the studio,
no,
or
I was hired? How'd
that job opportunity come along?
The job opportunity came along. It was just one of those things. They had an issue at one of the studios, and they needed a guy. And let me digress slightly on my career. When I came back from England, I was we had a new chief, Bill Bratton, and put me in charge of the mental illness. Chief of detectives, Jim McMurray, put me in charge of the mental illness project, putting together best responses to persons with mental health issues. And we'll talk about that one in a sec, because that's really where my career took off in a completely different position. One of the units that I also oversaw was LAPD's threat management unit, dealing with the stalkers and dealing with all kinds of stuff. So when the studio had an issue that came up involving a behavioral issue, they reached out to the threat management unit, and one of the detectives said, hey, maybe you might want to hire. They said, hey, we want to hire somebody to be a director of security. And they said, well, if we got this guy, you might want to talk to our boss, our former boss, who's now a captain. And so that's how that one came about. I literally got a phone call, and a couple weeks later, they're like, okay, we're good to go. So I gave my 2 weeks notice, and that was it.
The thing that really ties into what I like to talk about as a whole with the podcast is there's a lot of fun things that these jobs offer. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
All the way you want to work SWAT 30 years, whatever, but you have to always be thinking about, what do the current assignments provide you when
Absolutely.
you leave this job?
Absolutely.
So you're new into your career, or you get the opportunity to work that 100-mile-an-hour team, go work it. But like you said, you got put in charge of the mental health team, but that there was an ancillary component to it of the threat management team. And maybe you weren't even thinking about the opportunities that would grow for you. But then once you're there and you have the opportunity, you're like, oh, look at the doors that open by going to the non-sexy assignments, so to speak.
By that time in my career, I already had the security company. So it was like, okay, this will be a good transition, just overseeing these guys. Now you got to play it by straight up. You can't cross those lines, right?
Of course.
I can't, if we've got a stalker, someone's trying to, stalk some celebrity, I can't work that and say, hey, I'll work that into my security gig, because then you screw everything.
Correct.
And everything's gone. So you just, you're able to take classes, you're able to go do things. The mental health piece was a big one. I got a call, literally, like I said, from the chief of detectives saying, hey, I got a job for you. And I'm like, all right, I'm a lieutenant. Some of the best lieutenant gigs at LAPD, robbery, homicide, major crimes, narcotics, all work for this guy. This could be a good this could be a good thing. So it's like, yeah, you're going to put together this mental health project. And I'm like, I don't know shit about mental health. I truly didn't. I mean, at the time, and I'm going to oversimplify it, but it was like, I tell people I didn't know the difference between a schizophrenic and bipolar disorder. I mean, I knew they were both, I knew what they did kind of thing, but I didn't know. But I was smart enough to be able to hire some good people. And those people knew. And as a result, we were able to build things. And so I'd get somebody say, hey, you know what, why don't we do this? Why don't we look at that? And I'd say, okay. Now, we had a consent decree, which forced the LAPD to do some things. So I was given a little more latitude than a lot of other people. So, for example, we developed a program we called CAMP, Case Assessment Management Program. We identified that our frequent flyers, those high utilizers of services, would had certain patterns. And if you manage those cases, you're cutting down on not only the overall number of cases, but you're able to save a lot of resources. So two came to mind. We had a guy who, his name was, I forget what name I used when I testified in front of the United States House of Representatives. Mike, we'll say for the sake of conversation. And he was schizophrenic. He was also suffered from bipolar disorder. He, the 15th, 16th, 17th of every month as a result of not taking his meds, he began cycling out. 17, 18, 19 became violent. 21, 22, attempted suicide by cop. Attempted to have the police kill him. And
this was happening every month?
Every month. And we looked in a 12-month period, he generated 54 calls for services. And many times it resulted in him being transported to place on a hold, but then the hospital releasing him without doing anything. So I'm like, okay, this guy was our patient number one in camp. So we got it. So he was, I'm vapor locking on the trim all of a sudden. But his mother had authority over him at that point. And so we would contact the mother every month on the 10th, says he's been taking his meds. No, he hasn't. Okay, then we send a team out, scoop him up, get him to the hospital, get him his meds, and that pushed us off for another month. And we went 5 years without a call from this guy who was generated, 54 calls in 12 months. I mean, it was like, okay, we found this. We had another guy who every day he called the fire department because he smelled smoke, and every night he called the police because he heard people in his attic. And just it was a $500 at the time. $500 was the minimum response for a fire engine to pull out of a station. That's the minimum cost. Helicopter was I think $300 a minute for the helicopter to circle. I mean, so when you look at the resources he was using, well, he was a vet, and so because of his mental health stuff, you'd take him to the VA, and he'd just get frustrated because it's like, okay, fill out this form now, go wait in that line, and he couldn't do that. So we put a nurse together because our teams were it was a co-response team, but we had detectives and we had doctors and nurses from the Department of Mental Health on the same team, and they worked their connections with the VA, and in 3 hours, they sat him down, got him enrolled in all this stuff, and he went for, I don't know that he ever generated a call again, didn't during my career. So that was another one of those wins where we're able to put these things together. So you look at those things and say, okay, how do I build my team? But like you said, as we're getting back to the transition thing, who'd have thought I'd be making a retirement gig out of mental health stuff? So I had to respond to every officer-involved shooting and every what LAPD calls a categorical use of force. Categorical use of force is use of force where the suspect is hospitalized, not emptied, but is admitted to the hospital, because we know that if you have a use of force and the suspect ends up in the hospital, it's a lawsuit. So let's investigate it and let's document it, because otherwise what most agencies find is 3 years later, when this is a lawsuit, you're relying on a report, a use of force report that was written by a sergeant 15 hours into an overtime shift who's just covering boxes and stuff and not really doing the stuff. And it makes it harder to defend our officers and our deputies in those situations. So I had to respond to those. I responded to every barricade. and started noticing this pattern of people.
But your response or your team's response was strictly from the mental health component?
My job was to simply look and say, is there a mental health component to this? And if there is, what can we do to help mitigate that problem? And I remember we had one night where Mike Hillman, and I know you may know the name. Mike's legendary within LAPD.
Sounds familiar.
He's done a lot of counterterrorism. He was the first chief and overseeing special operations at LAPD. He was a SWAT sergeant, which is when I met him. Just, great LAPD legend. And we get to the scene and they get the guy out, and the family turns to him and says, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with our son? And he goes, nothing. Talk to him. Because we already had a bed lined up for him. We had because we had resources that weren't available to patrol folks. So we were really able to do that. But I started noticing this pattern of people doing stupid shit and getting themselves shot. We always joke about, what was he thinking? He brought a knife to a gunfight. Maybe he was thinking you were going to kill him.
Right.
Maybe that was his plan. There was a study done in 2009 by Chris Mahondy and Reed Malloy at Stephen White that was a national study on suicide by cop, that 30% of police shootings have indicators of suicide by cop, that they're doing this intentionally to force the police to kill them. And so I developed an expertise in suicide by cop and use of forces involving the mentally ill, just a very small segment. We talk about de-escalation. And one of the things we talk about in class is let's talk about it. Can you de-escalate another person? The answer is no. I can create an environment to slow things down, to calm things down, to help you self-de-escalate. But there's no magic word or phrase that I can use that you're going to go, oh, hey, thanks, Rick.
Calm down works.
I'm better. Yeah. Calm down always works. So we look at those things and say, just because a person couldn't self-de-escalate doesn't mean that the officers did anything wrong. We also point out that a use of force can be a de-escalation technique. If I can hit you with a beanbag, I can hit you with a 40 and you drop the knife and I don't have to kill you, I've de-escalated that situation. Granted, we'd prefer to do it verbally, but the goal is to not kill the person.
Right.
So I developed a class on suicide by cop that I've been teaching since 2005. But in 2020, Post picked it up. And we've been teaching, like I mentioned before, and I know one of your other guests, Stephanie Kisa, who still teaches for me. We've taught over 250 classes, over 10,000 in 15 states. We've had officers and deputies from all 50 states take our class online, and several folks from other countries. So we're seeing results. We're seeing results of that. So that's a good thing. But when I go back to when I took the job working to do this mental illness project, one of the captains I was going to be working with came up to me and said, "Hey, Rick, have you drug tested?" "No." "Why?" "Because you got to be high to have taken that job." And then I was approached by one of the consent decree monitors who said, "Hey, if you can make this happen, if you can get the department in compliance, we need to make you a captain, because it's going to take a miracle to get the department in compliance." And I said, "So what you're saying is it's going to take a miracle for me to make captain?" "Well, I didn't really say that." "Yeah, you did." But again, so you don't know where those opportunities are going to come from. I tell people just on the mental health piece, there's so much out there right now on law enforcement responding to mentally ill, responding to people in crisis, that there's lots of opportunities to learn things to not only improve yourself, but to save lives. When I was a narcotics expert, this was before we had DREs, the drug recognition experts. I was an expert in PCP and heroin. And to do that, part of doing that was you sat down and talked with the people who use these drugs. Why do you stick the needle in your arm? How do you do it? How do you fix your kit? What's in your kit? Why do you use the cotton? Why do you do these things? So that you understand why they do it. So when you go to court, you can testify to those things. Talk to these people when we're putting them on a hold. Why do you want to kill yourself? How do you want to kill yourself? They have a plan. If you get a call from a family member that their loved one is suicidal, I will guarantee you this is not the first time their loved one has contemplated suicide. And I will wager very heavily that this is not the first time they've attempted suicide. And the family member knows how they want to kill themselves last time, and the family member knows how they want to kill themselves this time. And we're not asking the questions. We're not asking them. Wait here, we're gonna go handle this. Slow it down.
Right.
Pump the brakes. We teach in our class 2 questions I want you to ask yourself, and for all your audience, again, same thing. What I want you to think about is 2 things. When I'm responding to a call with a person who's mentally ill, who's suicidal, 2 questions you need to ask yourself. Number 1, do I need to go in there? And number 2, if I need to go in there, do I need to go in there right now? And very frequently the answer to question number 2 is no. Slow it down. Get some backup. Put a plan together. Because these are the things that when we came on the job, 44 years ago now, when I came on the job, you just go kick the door and go in there and handle it, right?
You force a bad situation, or you make a bad situation even worse.
Yeah, that officer created jeopardy, right? So now we've had situations where we're seeing agencies across the nation disengaging. What's going on? He's inside. He's threatening to kill himself. Anybody else in there? Nope. Anybody else at risk? Nope. We're leaving. Fresno PD has a great admonition that they actually read that says, we're leaving. We believe that if us going in is simply going to escalate the problem, and we're going to leave. So if something changes, call us, but otherwise we're gone. And that came about as a result of a barricade where you had a chief and a captain standing outside. Suspect says, I got a gun. I'm going to kill myself. And if you try to come in and stop me, I'm going to kill you too. And like, okay, if we go in there, we're going to kill this guy and we could lose an officer. Why are we going in there? And they didn't. And next morning, they had one of their mental health teams call him. Guy came out, surrendered, took him to the hospital. All's good.
But thinking about it from the longer term solution, I would say that for a lot of us, we get called to that 5150 and in our head, that stopwatch is going off. It's like, I don't want to deal with this call. How quickly can I get away from it?
Sure.
But the thing that you're not thinking of is this problem isn't going to go away. No. You're going to be back here again.
Yep.
So let's put the brakes on a little bit. Let's put a little bit of patience into this, and let's try to look at a solution that works not just today. Maybe put the maximum amount of effort into it today, but we think of a long-term solution so that you, your partners, or anybody else doesn't have to re-deal with this problem.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We need to have those problems and have those programs developed. California, and this is my major area of expertise, obviously, is California. If you look at California, look at the website for the California State Hospital System. Now, the state hospital system used to be the mental hospital system, but they took the word mental out because of stigma. Cool. State hospital system has a budget of $1 billion. They have 6,000 beds in the state hospital system. Of those 6,000 beds, according to their website, 5,500 of them are people that are not guilty by reason of insanity, who are never, ever going to get out, and people who are too crazy to be housed in the state prison system. So you've got 6,000 beds, 5,500 of them will never be able to be used by anybody else. So that leaves 500 beds for the 40 million people in the state of California. So when the officers and deputies are taking their patient to a hospital to put them on a 5150 hold, the hospital doesn't have any more beds. The hospital simply has to triage them and say, okay, who's my least problem? And that's the guy that they kick out the door. And that's the guy that literally walks across the street and jumps off the parking structure at the hospital because he was suicidal, and they just, there's just no place for them to go. That's the people that are homeless. When you look at the people that are homeless, it's not a housing issue. It's not a matter of there's no affordable housing. If you talk to the people that are out there, most of them are severely mentally ill, under the influence of alcohol or drugs, or both. If you look at the family that's homeless, where are they? They may be sleeping in their car, but they're hanging out. They're going to the mission. They're getting their meals. They're getting clothing. They're getting, they're able to get showers and things. That's where our problem is as it deals with those things. And I know that's a whole nother podcast we could do on that. But there's some things that need to happen. We're putting all this money into these homeless, dealing with the homeless. Mayor Bass now wants the wealthy to buy houses for the homeless, or, this is not I talked to a woman recently, and she said her son is severely paranoid. She says, if you put him in a house, within 24 hours, there will be no drywall left in that house because he's looking for all the listening devices. And that's his mental health issue. So then he's ripped all the drywall out, and now he can't be there. They move to another house, he rips all the drywall out. So those are the issues there. But we digress. So to kind of get back to the thing is that you were talking about, the transition. Start to have a plan. As you start to see opportunities come along, take a look at it. I can tell you the jobs, the guys that I see the most, and it's not the exciting stuff. It's not the exciting stuff at all. The guys that work financial crimes, the forgery guys, the guys that are working the check kiting schemes, and the guys that are working all the.
You're really dating yourself. Yeah, I don't think anybody passes checks anymore.
But the guys that have that expertise, that are looking at the financial crimes, the things where people are using the scammers and the skimmers to get your credit card or your ATM information. Those guys are all working for banks. They're all working for financial institutions. You look at the guys that work auto theft. They're all working for LoJack. They're all working. I talked to a guy the other day. He's got a whole business now just dealing with helping to deter the thefts of catalytic converters. I mean, there's things that are out there that you don't think about when you're working the patrol stuff, but we've all been there. Something happens, you're investigating a crime, and you go, I'll bet I could prevent this one if I did this. And, that'd take a lot of work. And I'd have to get a patent, and I'd have to get a copyright, and I'd have to do this. I'm not saying develop the technology. You may not be able to do it. I don't know how to develop the technology. But I can recognize the opportunity and say, okay, here's something. Let me work this. Let me turn this into a gig and see if I can make a little money and see if I can make this move on. And then sell the concept. Go consult with somebody and sell the concept. A lot of guys want to be expert witnesses. Use of force. A lot of use of force expert witnesses out there, and they're guys that I know that know each other, worked with each other, that are on opposite sides of the table. Can you be an expert witness? Sure. It's a lot of work. It's not just a matter of saying, I look at this and I think that this is objectively reasonable. Great, thank you. Now we're going to go into the why you think it's objectively reasonable. You see there's opportunities out there. I've transitioned personally. I don't do much expert witness stuff anymore. I do more consulting. It's not as much heavy lifting. My reports aren't quite as in depth, and they don't even have to disclose that they've hired me as a consultant, as opposed to the expert witness who's writing a report. They have to put that out there, and so we can have conversations, and I sit down with attorneys all the time and say, hey, here's the big one. I'll give you an example, and I'm not worried about somebody stealing it. If you can deal with it, you make money doing it. There was an 11th Circuit decision that just came down. Caldwell versus North American Casualty versus Caldwell. Caldwell takes out a $2 million life insurance policy on himself. It's got a suicide clause. If he kills himself within 2 years, policy's null and void. Okay. 22 months later, 2 months shy, he decides he wants to kill himself. But he can't do it because of life insurance. So he tells his family he's going to commit suicide by cop. He's going to have the police kill him. They call the police. He shows up. The police show up. He comes out with a rifle, points the rifle at the officer, resulting in his demise. Family says, oh, darn. Check, please. What's the death certificate say?
Death by gunshot?
But it's a homicide.
Yes, not a suicide.
Not a suicide. And the life insurance company said, wait a second, that's suicide. And they said, no, it says homicide. So the 11th Circuit said, in essence, when you have a guy who jumps in front of a bus, how do we classify that one? Suicide.
Assuming that they're, yes. Yeah.
So what the court ultimately said is that when a subject engages in an activity that they know will result in their death, that it's a suicide. And the court says very specifically, there's no difference between a guy who jumps in front of a bus, a guy who jumps in front of a train, or a guy who points a firearm at a police officer. So now we're working with medical examiners to start providing training to them to be able to help identify suicide by cop. The comment I get frequently from medical examiners is, well, we have to go off the police investigation. The officers aren't, if the investigators aren't looking at this stuff, we don't have it to use. Okay, so there's another training opportunity. I'm also getting calls now from insurance companies that are getting these $1 million, death claims saying, hey, that's a suicide, so let's take a look at that. So there's opportunities out there for all kinds of stuff. If you know what you're looking for, you look at something and say, how can I monetize that? So those are just some of those ways to be doing it. But like you said earlier, you got to start thinking early on. When you find something you're passionate about, find something you enjoy. That's the fun. And then if you can monetize that and make some money doing that, cool. I mean, that's the fun of what we do. It's like this, right? You found something that you enjoy doing. You enjoy talking to cops. You enjoy talking to veterans. You enjoy talking to people. Say, okay, it's a small niche. You're going for, hey, how do we transition, right? How do we help other people make this transition? Cool. And if you can put a couple dollars in your pocket, cool. But if not, just it gives you something to do in your spare time. So those are the big ones. We have so many opportunities we just walk by without thinking about it. So my simple suggestion is, when you're thinking about you're starting to retire, 5 years before you pull the pin, you need to start putting your plan together. You need to start putting your business plan together. If you can actually start the business, yeah, it costs some money. Everything costs money. But if you can start the business and have a couple clients so that when you walk out the door, you say, okay, I've already got a business. I've got clients that can refer me to other clients. And you're not just like one of a gazillion guys that walks out and goes, hey, what am I going to do? When I was working at the studios, I used to talk to the fire guys all the time. And they're like, there's no jobs for firefighters when we retire. Fortunately for firefighters, they've all built their side business during their career, right? Because who wants how many, there's so many fire inspectors and so many fire guys that are hired by a studio to do these things. That's a very limited group of people.
I don't know if it's to their credit or however you want to look at it, but it also seems like a lot of fire guys, man, when they retire, they're just done. Mm-hmm. You don't see them going off for career number 2.
Yeah, there was a study out a couple of years ago that within most firefighters die within 30 years. When they hit that 30-year mark of the day they came on the job, most of them are done.
Oh, wow.
It's so physically taxing, and again, that's changed a lot with technology. Back before everybody had respirators and breathers and things on, people were running in and eating smoke and all the toxins and stuff that were in there. But we still see a lot of firefighter deaths as a result of cancer. The actuarials for police officers is that for every year after 30 or after 25 you take 1 year off your life expectancy. And every year after 30, you take 2 years off your life expectancy. Now, the actuarials say that the average male will be dead by age 78. Okay, so you're dead by 78. If you worked, in my case, 39 years. So I lost 5 years in the first one plus 18, right? So I've lost 23 years. 23 from 78 is, 55. I'm already dead. Right,
you're doing a great interview, though.
Well, I think part of that is just, I try to stay in relatively good shape. I've had knees replaced, a shoulder replaced. I've broken my back. Obviously the head injury. I'm a walking piece of titanium. But I got young kids. I have something outside this job, and a lot of guys don't. We see that a lot with suicides. And I know Stephanie mentioned this when she did her podcast with you, but what we see is that officers are at their highest risk of suicide when their career is ending. not necessarily a planned retirement, but an unplanned retirement, unplanned departure from the agency. We're on a bullet train. We're on a bullet train that's going 200 miles an hour. And you step off that bullet train, you're not part of it anymore. It's not that we don't love you. It's not that we still don't care about you. We just don't see it. And I'll give you an example. If you change a shift, just change shifts. 3 months later, are you still hanging out with the guys you hung out with from the previous shift? Why not? Do we not like you anymore? Do we not see you? No, we're doing it because we've moved on, right? We've developed different hours, different things, different interests. We've moved on. If you take a guy who's injured, who's off, we see those guys are at very high risk for suicide because it's a 3-year process in California. From the time you're injured to the time that you get all the medical reports and all the stuff before you finally get your final and stationary thing, it's a 3-year process. And then it's a phone call. You get a phone call from HR or from your attorney saying, hey, congratulations, your pension came through, you're officially retired, come drop your shit off, we're going to give you your card with your HR 218 on it, don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out. That's it. And a bunch of guys will be sitting around and say, hey, whatever happened to Paul? And you go, oh, shoot, he retired about 6 months ago. No shit. Was there a party? No. I don't know. Well, did he want one? How would I know? Why don't we know? It's because we've lost touch. And it's not, again, that we don't care. And I experienced this with my injury. I was only out of the play for a very brief time in the scheme of things. That first 3 weeks when I couldn't see, what do you do? I mean, I'm a very active guy. I'm living a couple blocks from the beach. I go down to the beach, I go surf, I go do my stuff. What am I doing? I can't read a book. I can't watch TV. I can't go for a walk. I can't drive. I can't see. I'm completely reliant on other people. And then once my vision came back, I still couldn't drive for a little while. I probably shouldn't have driven for a lot longer, but I couldn't ride my bike. I still couldn't go, do some swimming stuff because, again, my equilibrium was off, and it was a different time. And as soon as my vision came back, I didn't have people at my house 24 hours a day anymore. Because I'm okay now, and they're in everyone's mind, in my own mind too. I'm like, I don't need you. But it was funny because when Frank would come by, Frank Verlito, the wellness guy, when he came by, I was single at the time. So his first stop when he came to my house was my kitchen. What's in your refrigerator? A bunch of pizza boxes? Because that's what it was. And if he didn't like what he saw, he was on the phone, and 30 minutes later, a police car pulled up with 2 bags of groceries. And said, okay, now let's get you some real food. I mean, those are the things that I recognized early on in my career about, okay, I wasn't in a bad place. I wasn't in a dark place. I was just banged up. But I see how that later in my career, how that those people who were being impacted by those things, how those little things helped. So for me, when I was a lieutenant, when I was a captain, inspector, chief, because I went to University of Texas for a while, and my career thing, and after I left the studio, because we were going to move to Texas, took a job as an inspector there. My mother-in-law had a stroke. Family comes first. I came back to California, took a job as a chief of police at Cal State LA. I did my 5 years and 2 days to qualify for my CalPERS pension. So when you next read that California's got a $70 billion budget deficit,
I'm adding to it.
I say thank you. But when you look at these things and you say, okay, one of my people is going to be pensioned off, I was there. I was with them at personnel when they filled out that paperwork. And it's an emotional time for them, I guarantee you. And the next thing, as soon as that had finished, LAPD personnel was on the 5th floor. The chief's office was on the 6th floor. The next meeting, as soon as they finished, I had an appointment with that individual, with the chief of police, to say thank you. Yeah, this is a shitty deal. You ended up getting medically pensioned off, and you can't do a lot of stuff that you were hoping to be able to do, and your world has changed. But thank you, and it meant something. Mm-hmm. Because we don't get that from a lot of times, And like I said, so when we see those people that are injured, we gotta keep touch with them. We gotta stay in touch with them, and sometimes that's hard. I mean, the first thing that they don't want to talk about is how you feeling?
Right.
Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about what's going on in the world. Let's talk about what's going on with other people at work. Let's tell stories about people. We all have good stories about other people's, foibles and mistakes and errors. So we're like, oh, geez, that didn't come out well. Those are the things. One of the other guys we teach with retired from SWAT, and he was completely messed up physically. He's still having surgeries. And this is, he was actually one of my instructors when I went through the academy. And he's still having surgeries. And he retired in 99. So, 25 years later, he's still having surgeries and multiple ones. Just those things happen, and he talks about the fact that his daughter had a health issue, and that was his focus. Wasn't worried about himself. He said, but all of a sudden, once that health cleaned up, now all of a sudden,
now what?
I don't talk to the people I talk to. He had a good, good family network to kind of keep him going. But he says he very easily could have ended up in one of those dark places if it had not been for those things. So that's the big one for me is when we lose our people, when people retire. If this is all I worked with a guy, and he was a command officer. And when I promoted to captain, he say, congratulations, you're one of the top 1% of the Los Angeles Police Department. How's that? We have 100 people at the rank of captain or above in a 10,000 man department. So you're one of the top 1%. I'm like, I always thought SWAT was the top 1%. And I thought that, our air support guys, our bomb squad guys, those guys, that's the top, that's the elite. I'm just the guy that passed a test and somebody decided politically, we'll go ahead and make this guy, right? Then he made a comment that still resonates with me. And he goes, I'm a chief officer with the Los Angeles Police Department, and this is who I am. And I take up a lot of pride in this. And I'm like, no, dude, this is what you do. This is not who I am. This is what I do. Who I am are those kids with my name. Who I am is the father to and friend to the bunch of people and a father to 4 great kids. And he had 2 kids who played football at USC in Oregon, and just an amazing family. And I thought, wow, that's sad that this is who you are. And, could have just been a slip of the tongue, but I don't think so. I think this is, and I see that, we see these guys with 30, 40 years in a chair. And I get it. I was that guy, but this was never that. I never wanted to be a chief of police. I took the job because I came back to California and I needed to do some stuff to be able to pay for some of the things that I wanted to get. Right. Cool. And I always refer to that as drop on steroids, right? Because I get my drop, but I'm also doing this, but I'm developing earning another pension at the same time. So I'll get the same as drop. But I look back at what I did and what I could have done and where I could have been. And I don't know that if I were to do it all again, I don't know that I would have taken a job as a chief. It was a fun job. I enjoyed it. I think I made an impact on the agency in a positive way, but didn't do the job. And so that's kind of where I got to recently. It was, I'd be like, okay, I teach about 1 day a week now. And if that, and if, a case calls, hey, we got this case, you want to do it? I make $300 an hour to sit by my pool and read reports. That's a pretty good gig if you can get those. They don't happen all the time.
Right.
But a lot of times
you've built up your reputation and the connections you have to bring you those cases. Like you said, you're not going to walk out the door tomorrow not having done this and go, hey, I'm ready, I'm available.
Yeah. And the bottom line is now I'm at the point where I'm going, you know what? No, but I got a guy who can do that for you.
Right.
I've got a guy. And I'll call him and say, hey, you want to take this case? And they go, yeah, sure, I'll take this. And cool. And then I stay on as a consultant and don't make quite as much, but I still get a couple of bucks at the end of the day for helping the attorneys figure out how they're going to approach this stuff at trial.
One of the things I want to add, and you did hit on this, is that Yes, it's very important for us as organizations to stay in contact with our people, especially when they're going through difficult times.
Absolutely.
It's also incumbent upon us to, and I've mentioned this before, utilize that ability to stay connected with those who retire as twofold. One, you get intelligence for what they're doing on the outside world, but you're also giving them the lifeline back to the organization by feeling like they're still connected. But most importantly, like you said, with that other captain, this job is just a job.
Yeah.
It's a uniform that you put on and go to work, the same way a mechanic puts on a uniform and works on your car. But at the end of the day, to a degree, at the end of the day, they take their uniform off and they go home. More of us, I really think, need to look at this as this doesn't define my life. This is my job that I do, but I have so much more going on outside of work.
And that's true. And that's the transition. How do you make that transition? Because when you came on this job, you're out there crushing crime, cheating death with minimal supervision. You are having a blast. We're running, 200 miles an hour.
You're working weekend nights with a bunch of other young guys, and you're the only people who have Tuesdays and Wednesdays off.
And having fun. It's funny you say that, because we had, when we first went to a 312, we had a platoon thing. They were testing different types of scheduling. And my platoon worked Friday, Saturday, Sunday, every Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And it's like, okay, so we're working every weekend. All right, cool. Well, guess what? Pyramid Lake, on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, we were up there with the ski boats. Mammoth, Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays, we're up skiing during the winter.
And there's nobody else up there.
and it's still a bunch of us, right? Yeah. We all know each other, bring families and friends, and
We're going to take a quick break from the conversation. First, thank you for your continued support. Second, I appreciate the fact that you've made it to this point in the conversation, but I still need more help. If you would, if you're not already, please follow, subscribe on whatever platform you're getting the podcast. If you could leave me a rating, leave me a comment or a thumbs up. And last, if you could share this, either this episode or the podcast, with anybody that you think might benefit from it, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you again. Let's get back into the conversation.
At what point do you make that transition from this is the coolest thing and I can't get enough of it to, maybe I need to do a couple other things? A lot of times that's a divorce that causes that to happen. A lot of times it's other things. I know of 3 people that killed themselves, not intentionally, falling asleep, we believe, driving home after working 3 overtime shifts in a row, working literally, 36 hours straight. I can tell you times when I got call outs on investigations, and something, on an investigation, you can't walk away sometimes.
No.
And I remember getting a call at 3:00 in the morning, getting out of bed, and I remember crawling back into bed at 3:00 the next morning. I was 24 hours nonstop after maybe 5 hours sleep, and we powered through and we did it, and we took care of things. I remember also getting, for some of my other investigators who had farther to drive than I did, just getting hotel rooms for them. And even though the department didn't pay for it, the union did. I called up and said, "Hey, look, here's what's going on. I'm concerned." And they go, "Hey, we'll pay for the hotel." I'm like, "Cool. We're taking care of our people." When you see your guys are working all these things, you got to go, guys, slow down. What's your end game here? What's your if it's to just get more chrome for your Harley or or get that new jet ski or whatever. Do you really need it right now, or do you just take some time for yourself? You've got to find a way to decompress and walk away from this monster, because it is this job will eat you alive. And then all of a sudden, that's the guy who, when all of a sudden he's got an IA going, and looks at, I could get fired. That's the guy who goes to that very dark place very quickly. And we see a lot of guys kill themselves in those situations. Are we seeing it? Are we picking up on what we call the leakage? The leakage is when they start to communicate. We were teaching our class in Hayward, and we were talking about all the things that people do before they commit suicide. And the room just shifted. I mean, I could feel it. I feel a change in the room. I'm like, okay, something just happened. What am I missing? Well, we were teaching a class on the 1-year anniversary of when one of their officers killed himself. Mm-hmm. And their union president was in our class. He goes, everything you've talked about, he did. He was Venmoing people. One of the things that people do when they're getting ready to go, right? They're getting rid of their personal possessions. He was Venmoing people money. Hey, 3 years ago, you brought me lunch. I forgot to pay back. Here's $50. I mean, he was sending money to people. He was giving away things that you're like, why is he doing that? And no one connected because they didn't see him. Right. And so then all of a sudden, a guy gets a text one time saying, hey, I'm in a better place now. Just want to say thanks for your help. And maybe soon we'll grab a cup of coffee. The guy's like, okay, cool, not a problem. He goes to lunch. They're talking. This guy's name comes up. Somebody says, hey, I got this text. Table freezes. All 5 of them got the same text. 105 people got the exact same text. Oh, shit. It was too late by the time they realized what was happening. Right. Are we looking out for each other when we're doing our stuff? Or are we seeing other guys saying, hey, you know what? This is probably not good for you to be working all this overtime. Now, as a manager, as a supervisor, you got that fine line. Hey, dude, I think you need to go not work a shift. Take a day off, go do something else. Well, the grievance comes because I was denied an overtime shift. Well, no, I didn't deny it. I'm just suggesting that maybe you don't do this.
Right.
That's, how do we take care of our people when they can't see they need to be taken care of? That's the tricky part of wellness. And that's the tricky part of having those conversations.
Well, I think that's also the difficult part of being a leader in the sense of having those crucial conversations, identifying behavior, and dropping it back down to being a person. Hey, right. You may be my subordinate, but at the end of the day, Rick, I see that you're working every single available overtime. Everything good. Do you think maybe you need to take a weekend break? You don't need to, and start having that personal conversation and find out what's their motivation. And maybe it does get to a point where just as a boss, when you're looking out for the betterment of the organization, hey, I'm going to have to deny this overtime because you've worked the last, 29 straight hours.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. I was one of those people. I took a lot of pride in my job. I took a lot of pride in doing what I did. And I had a ton of overtime. And LAPD at the time, we had a cap at 400 hours. And I was regularly at, 1,200, 1,500 hours on the books. And, I had no problem taking off. In fact, what usually happened is, around April or May, because we're going into the end of the fiscal year, they say, hey, we got a little extra cash. We'll pay you back for some of this. But your overtime's still too high, so you need to take some time off. So we're going to put you off for a month. So you got some extra cash from that cash out on the overtime. I'm off for a month. Oh, but because I was working hard and I worked the night shift, I got on call during the day Monday.
All the court appointments,
2 hours. I don't have to go to court because all on call stuff. Because all the hype cases, right? That's all on call. So it's like 2 hours in the morning, an hour in the afternoon. So you get 4.5 hours of overtime. You burned 8 hours on your day off. You just got 4.5 of it back. And they're like, how is this guy's overtime never goes down? And it's just like, okay, I used it to my advantage, but I took lots of time off when I could. I just, hey, I'm going to go do this. And they'd be hard pressed. I remember one time I kept asking for some time off and my lieutenant wouldn't give me that time off because I was one of his top producers. And finally the captain called everybody in and said, why is your overtime high? I said, we had a little thing in the back of the time book that said, for days that you requested to take off. And there were like weeks at a time I had requested and denied. And so she just finally closed up the overtime book and said, the time book and said, here, we'll see you in August. So, okay, that's a good. But again, I also had a lot of good gigs too, working the beach detail, for example. That was a lot of fun. There's nothing there that's going to turn into a career. Right? No. I mean, that you can parlay into something else.
But go do it if you have the opportunity. But don't make it your entire career.
Exactly. But if you do make it your entire career with no other plan, that's cool. I know a lot of folks that did. Some guys, a lot of great cops that just said, hey, I'm working the beach. I'm out here in shorts and a polo. I'm riding my bike. I've got an ATV. I got a 4x, and I'm going to go up and just try. And I do my thing. I'm not working overtime. I'm just going to, this is what I do. And at the end of the time, I'm going, one of the guys still sails. He sailed around the world. And that's what he does. Another guy, I see him every month, with a bunch of other retired guys getting together. And he's still there. I mean, that's cool. But that's part of that. That was part of their plan.
That's exactly it.
It wasn't the obsessive thing to say, I got to do this. I got to do this. I got to keep working this overtime. That's the nice thing about the beach detail is generally there wasn't overtime, right? It's a Monday. It's a weekend job,
right?
During the day, nothing happens, at night, right? So, but yeah, this the what are you going to do? How are you going to do it? And what defines you? If you were to sit down right now and say, who am I? If the first word out of your mouth is I'm a cop, then you need to stop and redefine yourself. Especially if you've got more than 5 years on the job. If you have fewer than 5 years on the job, I get it. Hopefully you'll grow out of that. And I don't mean that to be negative or speak down to somebody who's there, but it's part of our growth process.
I do think one of the good things about the younger generation coming into it today, they don't make it their life the way we did when we were young officers.
When I came on, I remember having conversations with people, and I remember seeing when that transition started to begin, that this was now a job. For us, it was a vocation, and it was a calling. Mm-hmm. Now it's a job, and especially when the economy's tough, people will take a job that's going to give them guaranteed civil service protection. You can't get fired. You really have to screw up to get fired by a police agency, and it's got a pension at the end. In most cases, a lot of states don't. Right? A lot of states have the 401k contributions, those kinds of things, different financial incentives. But you're right. This is not a vocation for a lot of them. It's something cool to do for a while, and then I'll figure out what I'm going to do. I know lots of guys that I worked with who invented things or had their family businesses, and 5, 6, 7 years on the job back in our time, were leaving the job to go do something else, go do the family business or go do some other things just because of some of the negative things that happens. This is a tough job. We see horrible, horrible things. We're involved in just things that just, keep you up at night, wake you up in the middle of the night, deaths of children, deaths of partners. I've said before, I was fortunate that I never had a partner I was working with at the time killed, but I've been to scenes where my guys I'd worked with were dead. And I remember having to go and talk, and I knew their kids and I knew their wives. And that was even harder because you're trying to explain this thing. I remember one time, it was, I got a medal for something, whatever. And we had the Parker citation, which was a award given to the family members of people who were killed in the line of duty. So I'm getting ready to walk up and get my medal for doing something silly. And they present the Parker citation to Ed Kislow's son, and Ed was my partner. How do you compose yourself? How do you,
right?
So those are things that get to us.
Did you keep teaching even while you were working for the studio, and then when you came back to California and were working for when you went back as a chief?
I didn't teach when I was at the studio. That was a full-time job. Private sector, different rules, right? Hey, you don't get some side gig. You work for us. We expect. Plus, the level I was at, I was a director, and I oversaw everything pretty much west of the Mississippi. So I had lots of stuff to keep me busy that I couldn't say, hey, I'm going to go teach this class.
When you say
when I was in Texas, though, yes. And then when I was a chief, my boss was wise enough to recognize the value that me teaching a class has for me as an employee. Also, because if you're a decent instructor, and I like to think that I am, you get more out of classes than you actually give. I mean, I think we actually give a lot, but sometimes you get those nuggets that come back at you that you go, that's interesting. I didn't think about it that way. Maybe I need to try doing this. Maybe I'll change how I do something based on a conversation that somebody else had about their experience at work. And you go, I can see that maybe I did that once or twice. Maybe that wasn't a good thing, but you're not hearing it. You're hearing it as an outsider looking in. Then you're kind of, if you do what you should be doing, you're kind of reflecting on your own behaviors and saying,
well, it's the only way to your subject matter is going to stay relevant. If you're going into every teaching scenario or situation with the intention of what can I learn from this while I'm here.
And you made that's a really good point for two reasons. One, you talked about relevance. One of the things that I've learned is, and the reason I emphasize to people that you start figuring out what you want to do after you retire, because 3 to 5 years after you're gone, you're no longer relevant. Nobody cares. I mean, I have a topic that keeps me relevant because I'm literally, my suicide by cop class is the only class that's taught that's exclusively about suicide by cop and wellness and those things. But that's the only one anywhere. Look it up. No one else is teaching it. So as a result, we have to stay current. I got a great group of instructors that I teach with, and everybody's just as passionate about the topic because we're saving lives. We're not just saving lives of this subject who's suicidal, but we're saving lives of police officers. There was a study that came out a couple years back that in suicide by cop cases, especially those where the subject simulates a weapon, about a third of the time, 30% of the time, those officers have higher rates of depression, higher rates of suicidal ideation, higher rates of substance abuse. Many times they'll leave law enforcement and or commit suicide. And that's part of a conflict that goes on with us, our rational mind versus our emotional mind. Guy points an airsoft pistol at you. You shoot him. Good shooting? Yeah, no one's going to argue that. But when you find out it's not a real pistol, your emotional mind starts to say, maybe I could have done something different. I've argued, and I firmly believe we are very moral people. We truly believe in right and wrong. And if we have to take a life, it's because we had to take a life. And later you find out that maybe you didn't have to take the life, right? In the sense that it's not a real gun. Your mind starts saying, okay, maybe I didn't have to do this. Maybe I could have done something differently. And that's where that conflict, that internal conflict that happens. This is a big number, the suicide by cop number. Like I said, Chris Mahondy study in 2009, a third of all police officers' shootings, fatal shootings, are acts of suicide. A third of the time that we kill people, the subject did this intentionally to force that to happen. There's a 2019 study at Cal State Fullerton that for every completed act of suicide by cop, where the suspect was killed, there are 50 people who attempt to have the police kill him. Now think about that for a second. If 30% of our shootings are acts of suicide and 50 times that are people that want us to kill them, my God. I mean, that number for the flip of a switch and just by a different mannerism, a different action could just explode and be a huge number. You know, these are, and every one of these is going to impact our officers. We don't know how to talk about that. We don't know how to talk to our officers who've just killed somebody. I mean, when I came on the job, it was an option. Hey, you want to go see a counselor? Nope. All right. And what was our therapy? Put it down with a brown, shot in a beer. But we're colloquially called kill parties, where people would show up and we'd celebrate. And I use that term just for lack of a better one, but the fact that you survived a gunfight, We're celebrating the fact you survived. The fact you killed somebody to survive, well, that's just, that's part of the job. How'd that work out for us?
Worked horribly.
Yeah, a lot of us didn't work out so well, right? Especially with the alcohol stuff.
Right.
So what is, how are we treating those now with our agencies? Now we order you to go talk to a psychologist. Doesn't always work. I mean, I talked to a kid, great guy. One of the videos we show in our class, it's a horrible, horrible situation. It's a suicide by cop where the guy murdered his son. And long story short, he goes to his EAP. It's a small agency in northern Arizona, and they have an EAP, and he does an online EAP visit with a counselor. And the counselor clears him to go back to work. And 3 months later, he's suicidal. And because of a couple of situations that happened that caused some triggering events that caused him to have to go back to that moment. Not the fact that he killed the guy, but the fact that he couldn't save the child. Right. I mean, the child was dead when he got there, brain dead. And there's nothing that was going to change that outcome. But we're like I said, we're moral people. We're there. We came on the job. When you came on the job, Nash, why do you want to be a police officer? What'd you tell him?
Probably some canned response.
I want to help.
I want to help people. I want to keep the community safe. Something.
Yeah, but every single one of us said, I want to help people. Mm-hmm. And there's your opportunity, and you weren't able to help him. And that hit him. And I remember when I was in the University of Texas, one of my officers was in a shooting. And it was funny because University of Texas, considering the UT Police Department was put together after the tower shooting in UT Austin, there hadn't been any on-duty officer-involved shootings. And I'm working one day, and I'm in my office. I was an inspector, and I see a deputy chief and a captain and a lieutenant outside talking in the hallway, and I see the chief walk over, and I'm like, okay, something's going on. So I start to get up, and the chief kind of gives me a nod and says, hey, one of our guys just was in a shooting. I'm like, why are you people here? So I go downstairs, grab one of my sergeants. Hey, Sarge, he's on the phone. I go, we got an OIS, got to go. He's like, okay, go. He says, what's up? I said, so-and-so just got into a shooting, just killed a guy. And he's like, shooting. He goes to grab his rifle. I said, don't need it. It's over. It's done. As we're driving to the scene, he says, I didn't know what an OIS was, but it sounded important. They didn't have these things. So now it's time to get this guy some counseling. So HR says, oh, we have an EAP doctor. I said, no, we're not using an EAP. We need to find a specialist. We need to find somebody who specializes in this. Well, that's our protocol. I said, tell you what, you get we get on the phone with the DAP doctor. I just have one question I want to ask. Hey, doc, first of all, thank you for what you do. And I don't mean but please tell me what experience you have counseling people who've just killed somebody. None. We're done. This guy can't help my officer. I mean, we could help him with some things, but I said, this is Texas. We've got Texas Rangers. We've got Dallas PD, Austin PD, Houston PD. You can't tell me that there's not some specialists, that there's not a couple psychologists in the state of Texas, the great state of Texas, that could help our guy. We just, and that's because the civilians that oversee our processes aren't looking at what we need. They don't know. They just don't know. And it's not, sometimes it's a budget thing, but usually they just don't know what we need. Because a lot of times we don't know what we need. If you look at most agencies, I will wager most chief officers, most command officers have not killed somebody. We don't kill that many people. We don't as a profession. So if you've not been through it or seen somebody go through it, you don't know what to look for. You don't know what questions to ask. You don't know what help they may need. I was very blessed later on in my career doing the mental illness stuff that we worked so closely with the behavioral scientists from the LAPD and the folks from the Department of Mental Health that we were able to put some things together. And I was able to say, okay, these are things that we need to do. And I was able to take them to my other agencies. But we don't know a lot of those. A lot of times we just don't know. And it's not a fault. It's not a budget thing most of the time. Sometimes it is. But most of the time it's just that they don't understand what's needed. And and until we have a tragedy, until one of our officers ends up killing himself because he wasn't able to deal with his moral or his emotional mindset overrode the rational mindset. So those are difficult.
What's your advice for, especially when you're in a teaching environment, and like you said, when students break that barrier, now they have the ability to kind of communicate with you. From an advice for seeking help or seeking treatment, what do you usually recommend?
Well, and this has happened to us. I think we talked about this before we came on. The win for me is we've now had 20 occasions where we've been teaching a class where either during the class we've seen it or after the class we've been approached by people who are struggling, and they've come up and said, "Hey, I'm not in a good place. I've been considering suicide and I don't know what to do." And the first thing is find them some help. Find out if I can. A lot of times I'll talk to them and say, "Is it okay if I talk to your agency about this? Is it okay if I talk to your chief about this?" And say, "Hey, here's what's going on," because somebody there really needs to know what's happening, that something's happening. Does your agency have a wellness program? Excuse me. Does your agency have a counseling program? Most don't. I've got a couple of great friends who were. This is what they do. We were partners. We were police officers together. Now this is what he does, and he's so overwhelmed because now wellness is really where it should be, is getting emphasized. The problem is there's just not enough doctors out there. And so he's just so overwhelmed that he can't take any new patients, any new clients. So you've got to find who can get to this person, who's available to talk to him. And then is that the right person for him? That's a whole nother mix that I don't have the expertise to say, "Hey, you need to, this is the kind of doctor you need to get into," because all I know is you're struggling. All I know is that I can see as I'm talking about something in this class, you're emoting. You've got emotions. I mean, you're tearing up. I can see this as I'm teaching, and you're in the back of the room. And so during the break, I'm going to walk over and say, "Hey, we okay?" And then they'll go, "No, I'm not. I'm not okay." And sometimes they'll say, "Yeah, I'm fine." And you go, "No, you're not. Let's talk after class," and have those conversations. But you see that, and the first thing is to say, "Hey, we need help." Second thing is, what resources are available? We teach this class all over the United States. And California, for all of its perceived faults, is ahead of the curve, way ahead of the curve, and more so than a lot of other states. We have a lot more resources out here. In fact, the gentleman I mentioned from Arizona, from Clarkdale, when he started, his wife called the chief and said, "Hey, we got a problem. He's drinking. He's not sleeping. We have a problem." They packed he and his wife up and sent them to California for 30 days together. Because we don't talk to our families about this either. I tell people, if you're the kind of person that says, "I keep work at work and I keep home at home, and I don't let the two cross," I'm glad you can tell yourself that. But I'm going to raise the bullshit flag. You have a bad day at work, your dog knows you had a bad day at work. You come to the door, the dog meets you, the ears are down, that timid tail wag, like, "Hey, I don't know who peed on it or chewed it, but it wasn't me." The dog knows something's wrong. Your cat knows. Your cat just doesn't give a shit. But your dog knows something's wrong. And if you don't think your family members know, you don't think your wife, husband, partner, spouse, your kids know something's wrong, something's different. Now, I'm not going to have a conversation with my 5-year-old that Daddy had to kill somebody today, but they know something happened. Right?
You don't get to walk through the door and go, "Oh, nothing. It's fine."
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, but but you may have to, because you gotta figure out, because you're still trying to process what just happened to you. One of the things we talk about too, and when we talk about a bunch of stuff in our wellness piece, but is that one of the things that we do when we're at a critical incident was we begin to vocalize. We begin to verbalize. And you get there to the scene as the sergeant, as the partner officer, as the command officer, whoever, and your guy's just talking a mile a minute. And then we do this, and the pursuit, and the car went over the thing, and stop talking. just stop talking, right? Your mind is, the reason you're doing that is your mind is trying to process what just happened. And you're talking to yourself. I may be looking at you as I'm telling you, but I'm trying to explain to myself what just happened to me, because we're trying to grasp these things. So I get that you're not gonna be able to sit down and explain to your partner, your wife, hey, this is what happened today. I had to kill a guy. That may be as far as it gets. Hey, I had to kill a guy. I'm not ready to talk about it, but when I am, I want to make sure you're part of that conversation. I remember a guy, I was a chief at Cal State. There was a shooting in Pomona, Cal Poly Pomona, which for the people who don't know, it's about 100. I live in Ventura, so I'm 100 miles away from this guy. From this, I'm on vacation. I'm in the pool with my kids. And my wife comes out and says, "Hey, you need to take this call." It's the other chief says, "Hey, one of my employees was just murdered, brutal murder, non-sworn, and I need you. How soon can you get here?" I'm like, "I'm 100 miles away at 4:00 on a Friday afternoon. I'll see you Thursday, because it's going to take me a long time to get to you." And then he says, "Okay, hold on. All right, we just killed the suspect. I really need you here. How soon can you get here?" Dude, 30 seconds slower than...
Yeah.
And got to the scene. Brutal murder. It was ultimately, the shooting was a suicide by cop. He attacked the officer. The officer fired and actually had to move. The blaze momentum carried him past the officer. This was his third shooting. He had 2 of the prior agency that he struggled with. He went to the work for the Cal State because what are the chances that I'm going to kill a guy on a college campus? Surprise. As he fired the shots, he looked up and there was a news helicopter directly above him. Shit. Now, the helicopter wasn't filming him. The helicopter was filming the murder scene. But he calls his wife and says, "Hey, honey, just so you know, I just was in a shooting. I'm fine. I just killed a guy. I'll talk when I get home, but you might hear about this on the news because it's a big story right now." Wife turns the TV on. The helicopter has now changed its camera angle, is now showing her husband standing over this dead body. And obviously it affected her. He didn't know that until they started having some conversations, and we convinced him to get some counseling and talk to his wife about it, because we figured if soon as she saw this thing, it was affected. Come to find out, the 2 prior shootings affected her significantly. She just didn't know how to approach him, didn't know how to talk to him, and he didn't want to. He was trying to be noble, trying to keep you away from that, but it doesn't work.
The vicarious trauma.
Yeah. And those are the ones that we look at. There's not just the direct, but the indirect. Who else is impacted? In fact, I'll just throw this out there. One of the things we talked about in our class that I missed, just completely missed. I try to think I'm pretty much in tune to what's going on with stuff. Miss this one by a mile. Another type of indirect trauma is people who are exposed to details of violent incidents. We talk about our dispatchers, obviously, because dispatchers are involved. They're hearing it. They're hearing the help call. They're hearing the screams. They're hearing. Stephanie, in fact, has commented that she's heard more people take their last breath over the phone than she's had die in her presence in the field. But the other one we miss is our record staff.
Because they got to type the reports.
They have to read every report. They have to look at every photograph, because ultimately they have to certify that this is a complete copy of that report. What training, what counseling do we have for our records folks? Never occurred to me that I was putting that class together. I missed that one by a mile. And all of a sudden I was like, shit. You go to some of these places where you have these violent crimes, these sexual assaults of children. There's someone's reading those reports. You got these ICAC, Internet Crimes Against Children. In LA ICAC or LA County ICAC, they were doing 2,000 child pornography cases a month, and there's civilian staff who are reading the reports, right? Once the arrests are made and all those things. What are we doing for them? As we talk about wellness, we just, we don't want to just focus on our sworn people, because guess what? Guess who the records clerk is? That's a copper's wife, a copper's daughter, copper's son who had some physical thing, couldn't make it as a cop, couldn't go through the academy because of some other issue, but I'm going to do my part and I'm going to help. This is our family. These are our family. Are we talking to them? Are we taking care of them? And we're not in many cases. So I like to make sure that when we're talking about this whole transition thing, we're looking at how we're taking care of our wellness people. What are we doing for our people? Understand it, figure it out, read a book. Look at your experiences. Everybody's got it. Every single one of us suffers from some degree of post-traumatic stress. Every single one of us. How it affects us is as different as we are. What our trigger is, you don't know what your trigger is. I remember teaching a class one time, and we had a guy get up and walk out of one of our videos. Very benign video. Suspect, charges at the officer, and the officer shoots him. And I'm like, "You okay?" And he says, "No, I killed a guy in this exact scenario 6 months ago. I can't watch this video." Cool, I'm with you, brother. But if you can't watch this video, your problems are a little deeper than you think. Are you talking to somebody? And he was a police officer in Arizona, and not to the two examples of Arizona, but they're he's like, no, it's a small agency, up in northern Arizona, agency of 20 people, and that includes your civilian staff. You don't have a lot of resources up there, flag staff or NAUs, your closest experts. Well, that's 90 minutes to 2 hours away. Best case scenario. What are you going to do? How are you going to help your people? So, those are things that I say, you'll see it. You'll see somebody acting differently. You'll see them, and it's okay to come up and say, "You okay?" Pull them aside. Just say, "You doing all right?" And very often it's going to be, "Oh, I'm fine. Okay, I'm just going to tell you, I think maybe you're not. I'm just seeing some things in the way you're acting, the way you're responding, that tell me that there's something going on. I'm not trying to get in your business. I'm just trying to say, hey, if you want to talk, let me know. Or let me know if you need some help, let me help you find somebody." Because that's how we save lives. Remember, we came on the job to help people. We got to help people. We got to help ourselves.
Going back to you being a director at a studio, for somebody who might be interested in going down that path, you've already alluded to the amount of hours that it took. And one of the big decisions why you stepped away from it was the amount of time that you were away from your family. But you also mentioned you handled everything west of the Mississippi. So what kind of assignments would you have that were taking you on the road that you had to do?
There'd be an issue, a security issue that came up at a studio in another place, Hawaii for the sake of conversation. You got to go out there and sort things out. I didn't have a lot of staff. I mean, the security departments in most places are fairly lean. It's not like I have a whole security team. I mean, an exception obviously is Disney, because Disney is massive. But ultimately, you end up a lot of times if you're a one-man show, one or two person show. You've got to go do the thing. You got to look at the thing. You still got meetings. You got other stuff to do back at the office. If you happen to be working in California and your headquarters are in New York, well, that means they're 9 a.m. It's 6 a.m. here. Their desks waiting to do stuff, and you may be ended up on calls, and then you end up having a show, a live studio thing that's filmed in front of a live audience that goes at till 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening. Great. So now what, right? So now you're not getting home. I think for me personally, what changed, which would be different than a lot of other people, was my wife and I had younger children. Like I mentioned before, they were 3 when I retired. So that's a more as opposed to a guy who retires and his kids are all out of college. Excuse me. And so you don't need to be there as much for that. And so that was a different dynamic for me. But a lot of times it's you got to develop your expertise, right? Security stuff. So there's different groups that are out there. ASIS. They do a lot of security stuff, and they've got classes on hardening facilities and strengthening that. Also this is TEEX, TEEX. That's run out of Texas, and it's don't remember what the whole acronym is, but it's run by a lot of Texas A&M, and they have courses that they teach a lot of, and a lot of them are free because they're all done through FEMA. You look at those FEMA classes, and if you look at a FEMA class, for example, you'll see they've got the usual incident command stuff, right? We focus on those pieces, but they've got things all the way down to securing animals at a disaster. So if you want to be that guy, you need to broaden out on some of these things and look at the disaster, not just from, my emergency management aspect of it, my incident command, who's the ISC, who's operations, logistics, planning, admin and finance, those things, and put together that org chart. Great, you can put together an org chart. But what is your expertise within that area? Because you're going to find that many businesses need those other aspects covered, right? What is your resiliency plan? What are your continuity of operations? The continuity of operations is a huge, huge thing. I was starting to work on some of those before I left, and those are okay. When this happens, what's our plan? When the power goes out, what is our plan? Right? When the earthquake hits, and I'll just share this, when, not if, when the earthquake hits Los Angeles, the big one, right? I've always said that the difference between Los Angeles after the earthquake and New Orleans after Katrina is we'll be dry. Freeways are going to be down. Transportation is going to be down. Wherever you need the police, they're going to be someplace else. Wherever you need the fire department, they're not coming. Because if they can get their truck there through the damaged road, they're going to be someplace else. When I was at Cal State LA, which is just outside of downtown Los Angeles, I used to tell my folks, if you think that the one fire engine company that's a mile from the campus is coming here, you're wrong. They're all going downtown. Everybody's going to go to downtown LA, and we are on our own. So what is your plan? So being able to put together continuity of operation plans is a huge business out there. It's a huge, a lot of companies are looking for that guy. And it's fun because you're still in the emergency management piece. You're still doing, hey, here's how we handle this. You're just not the guy that's running around, chasing the bad guys, chasing the looters, right? That's fun. But now you want to be thinking about, what am I going to do at the next level? And I used to tell people that whatever job you go to, when you go to that promotional interview, whether you're going to go study you're going to be a sergeant, you want to be a lieutenant, you want to be whatever, you need to be walking in the door and convinced and have the knowledge to say, this isn't what I would do. This is what I have done. Because we've all done it. You've been to that. If you're a police officer, you've been to that officer-involved shooting. You were the first officer, first deputy at the scene. How did you handle it? Because guess what? That's your answer for the sergeant's exam, to show that, look, I'm already a sergeant. You just aren't paying me for that yet. So when you start to look at those area of expertise, the co-ops, continuity of operations, other little, things that are in there, and look at that FEMA catalog. It's got some pretty amazing stuff. There's classes that are on active shooters. Everybody wants an active shooter plan. Problem with the active shooter plan is if you have to implement your plan, people are already dying. Because there's already an active shooter. The shots are already being fired. So what are your protocols to help try to prevent that? One of the things that we talk about is that, in my opinion, and I share this opinion with a lot of folks who are far, far smarter in this area than I, that when you have a school shooting, a mass shooting, that by and large, those are acts of suicide, in that the subject is not planning to survive. They're planning on dying, either by their own hand or by having us kill them. So if we start focusing, especially in our schools, on those subjects that are exhibiting suicidal ideations, and not so much making it about hardening the target, it's all about the guns, because it's not about the guns. William Michael Stankiewicz, Red Lion, Pennsylvania, walked into a kindergarten class where he was completely unaffiliated with the school, armed with a machete, attacked 16 children and three faculty members. It's not about the guns. It's about what's going on in their head. It's about the suicidal stuff. Those are the things that you pick up as you're looking at developing your expertise in whatever field. And you say, okay, now how do I translate this into life after whatever agency you're with, because it's out there. Whether it's going to be as an investigator, whether it's going to be as the boss who's going to be looking at this stuff, there's people that are going to sit down and, like I said, if my headquarters are in New York, but I'm the only guy out here for everything west of the Mississippi, and I've got a stalking issue where a celebrity, or in fact, it's funny because the biggest stalking ones where we had were radio personalities after midnight and weather girls. Because most of the weather people are female. And what are they doing? It's full body shot. They're smiling. They're laughing. They're talking to who? They're talking to you. At 3 o'clock in the morning, when that voice in your head is keeping you awake and you turn on the radio, who are they talking to? That DJ's talking to you, because they're in your room talking to you. And these people start to obsess over these things. So when you start looking at those things as part of what I did with threat management and other stuff, you start saying, okay, I can see how does that translate to this? How does that translate to this safety protocol? How does that translate to what's possibly going to be an active shooter situation? It's there. There's lots of classes. Most of them are free. You develop your CV, and that's another one. Start now. If you don't have a CV, CV's the curriculum vitae. Latin. Basically, it's an expanded resume. List every single school, every single class you've taken or taught, every single one, and you put it on that CV. Because when it comes time to bring that up for that job, it's going to be too late to start looking all this stuff up, because they want it tomorrow, and you still have to figure out what class you took in 1994. So start putting those things together. As you're doing that, you'll start to see, wow, I've got this interest in this, and this is cool. And it's not just high speed, low drag tactic stuff, right? It's not just, the SWAT stuff. But if you look at the SWAT guys, what are they really good at? Communication, right? They're really good at being able to talk. They're really being able to present. These guys know what they're able to do. So that's a skill set that now they can translate to something else. Is that whether it's going to be executive protection or something else? I get it. That's usually where they gravitate. But a lot of other folks find something else that they're passionate about and can work into that. So as we're doing these things, look at, start that CV today. Sit down and just start listing classes you've taken, and then you'll say, oh, that was a good class, that was fun, or this, and you'd be surprised that all of a sudden you're going to start to see how that will actually start to shape your thoughts for what it is you want to do down the road. And you'll say, okay, I want to learn more about this. Go to that FEMA site, look at those classes that are there. You're going to be shocked at things that you already enjoy doing and things that you enjoy learning about, that there's people that have jobs that's what they do, is they sit down and say, hey, I work for this company. I work for, whether it's a studio, whether it's a bank. Guess what? That bank, you may not be the financial guy, but I'm going to guarantee you this. They've got a continuity of operations plan. They got a business plan of what they're going to do when something happens, when the power goes down, when something happens to that facility. A lot of it's tech stuff now. A lot of it's IT stuff now. I'm not my world. I freely admit that it's not my world, but I know the guy that does. I know the guy whose world that is, and I can put together a plan and say, okay, here's what I'm going to do, and guess what? I'm going to bring you on as a consultant, assuming that the agency already doesn't have a consultant for that particular thing. New businesses are starting up all the time. How do they do it? How do you want to do it? What is it you want to do? What is it you want to make? Do you want to build something? Do you want to just share your wisdom with people? Do you want to teach a class? Do you have your advanced degree? I went back to school to get my master's. I didn't want to get an MBA. I didn't want to do that, but I needed an advanced degree, so I enjoyed history. So, okay, go back, get a history degree. It doesn't take much, right? Because I've already got the general ed stuff's already out of the way. All I have to do is just some of the requirements, then get a master's. All right, cool. Now I can go teach. I can go teach at a university. I can teach criminal justice. I can also teach history, things I like to do. One of my passions is oral histories. People communicate what their histories were. Are we talking to our grandparents? Are we talking to our dads and moms? We're losing them. We're losing them every day. Are we getting their stories so that we can now share with their stories with our children, our grandchildren, our great grandchildren, pass down those traditions? in this day and age of podcasts like this, digital stuff, that's easy to do. Start tracking those things out. I'm getting calls all the time from different organizations saying, hey, we've got this thing. Could you help us start to put together an oral history project of pilots that served here, or soldiers that served here, or cops that worked during the LA riots or the 1960 Watts riots, right? These are stories that we're losing. People are interested that can turn these things around. And it's fun. It gives me something to do. So yeah, there's lots of things that you can be doing. Don't limit yourself to just the fact that I carry a badge and a gun. You're so much more than that. You really are.
For the cop out there, or even a veteran who develops a type of training course, if you were offering advice on, you mentioned, try to get that aspect up and going before you make a transition. How would you make that foray into making yourself available and putting on training classes?
So there's the markets out there. It's how do you get the word out? So for me, what happened was a couple things. I got a call from Post, California Peace Officer Standards and Training, that certifies police training in California. I got a call from Post saying, hey, would you be willing to put together a class on this suicide by cop? And that was in 2019, and October 2019. I retired in November 15th of 2019. I submitted the class to Post. The first week in December, it was approved. The first week of January, we taught our first class on March 9th. Now, I've got a class. It's in the can. It's a good class. I've got a group of folks that help me put together the stuff. We got good videos. We got all this stuff, right? You can put the thing together. Do you know how to put together into a PowerPoint, or however that presentation is going to be? If you don't, you know somebody who does. It's not that difficult. Okay, I drop it in the videos. I got a guy who can help me drop in the videos because I didn't know how to do it. Cool. So you can start to do that. Now you got to market it, right? So who do we market it to? Well, we market it to us, right? We go back to our agency, maybe your agency, maybe not. But you go to another agency, go to an agency and say, hey, I got this class. And it's, here's what it's going to cost you. And I think it's going to work. And you get a call. Now, my class, because we deal with wellness, because we deal with mental health stuff, is what Post calls Plan 5, which means it's free to the agency. So any police officer in the state of California can attend my class for free. If an agency wants to host my class, they call me up, say, come on up. And we say, cool, we can do it. Post pays for our travel. Post pays our per diem. Post pays my hotel. Post pays me to teach the class. All you got to do is have 15 bodies in there, and we're good to go. So that becomes its own ability to market because it's free training. Everybody needs Post hours. I also made sure I marketed it to dispatchers. Dispatchers have a lot of training needs. They're required to have 24 hours every 24 months, just like everybody else in California. There aren't a lot of classes for dispatchers. Call taking, verbal de-escalation over the phone. It's a different stuff. What's out there? You can develop a class. There's your market because they need the hours. Many states that if you're Post approved in California, they will approve your class in other states. Most states, the training has to simply be approved by the chief of police, and they get credit of their Post or Post equivalent, whatever there happens to, whatever happened. TCOL in Texas is Texas Commission on Law Enforcement. My classes are approved in Kansas. My classes are approved in Oklahoma, Arizona. And Arizona just made a transition. They used to be that you had to be approved by Arizona Post. Now Arizona Post doesn't do that. Now it's just got to be approved by your chief, but it has to be in a certain format that they like. So that's an easy modification. Find out where you want to go. Find out, because you know the people. Then you reach out and you look at some things and say, hey, I just, and yeah, part of the business is cold calling. Part of the business is marketing. I mean, you've got to reach out. So I see a shooting. Wow, I noticed you guys had this shooting. This appears to me to be a suicide by cop. Give a little bit, and here's this class. If you'd like to talk about this thing, I'd be happy to talk with you. Now, what have I just done with that email? I've just made 2 plugs. My expert witness / consulting and my instruction. So I can come at this two different ways. But usually it's going to be a phone call to one of their subordinates. You know, the chief's not going to want to talk to you. I get that. But somebody's going to be in there, usually a training coordinator, training sergeant. You say, hey, look, I got this class. We can do it for a minimum amount of money. I think when I did one of the least expensive ones I did, I think was I did them in Texas, a couple of them, where I charged $125 a head. I did one in Illinois, $99 a head. Right, had 100 people show up. You know, cool. You know, here's my handouts. Here's my this. Here's my that. Little things too. My handouts are all on a flash drive. It's got my logo on it. But it saves me when I'm carrying 100 notebooks, you know, and having to FedEx them or ship them over there, right? It's in my suitcase. There's just a bag full of flash drives. Okay. Well, you know, do the math. If I got 100 people at $100 a head, that's, you know, I'm okay for that class. You know, California Post doesn't pay that much. I think it's $720 for an 8-hour class for every 8 hours. Okay. But I still keep involved. I keep interested. I keep the class current. I keep stuff going, and keeps me involved with these other agencies where people call up and say, hey, I just had this happen. Or, hey, I just had this. Hey, I want to show you this video that we took of this shooting that we had because I think it was interesting and you might be able to use it in your class. I think it was very cool. Constantly being able to up to those things. So identify what your curriculum is going to be. Try to sit down with somebody who knows how to put together a curriculum or put together a class. We hate death by PowerPoint. I use PowerPoint because it's easy. Everybody gets it. Everybody's systems can handle it. But when I pull my slides up, I don't believe in death by PowerPoint. I'm not going to read it to you. You're in this class because you can read. My PowerPoints are simply a matter of helping me keep track of where I am in this conversation, because you're going to get conversation, you're going to get sidetracked because the guy's going to make a comment. You go, okay, this is good stuff. And you go, oh, shoot, where was I? Item 4. You know, that's how it works. But find that thing you're passionate about. People, I guarantee you, if you think it's important, there's somebody out there who thinks it's important, whether it's in the police business or out of the police business. If it's important to you, it's important to somebody else. Are you able to reach out to that group? Are you able to talk to those different groups? You know, like I said, I'm now working with insurers. So again, things, like I said, sometimes you do something and then that falls. So I was approached a couple years ago by an insurance company that insures law enforcement agencies. Most police agencies are not self-insured. They can't afford to absorb a large lawsuit. So they're part of insurance pools. Well, if you've got an agency in your pool that's causing a problem, that's causing everybody else to go, hey, why are we paying all this stuff? Because your guys are all screwed up. So the insurance company brought us in and said, hey, we want you to go look at these agencies. And we would sit down with you and say, okay, let me look at your policy manual. A lot of people use Lexipol, so that's an easy one. But here's your policy manual. I'm going to look at your policies. Now I'm going to read your use of force reports. Now I'm going to read your pursuit reports. Now I'm going to read your personnel complaints and see, are you doing what your policy says you do? And if you're not, we're going to say, hey, you got some problems here. And if you are, then we're saying, okay, you're doing a good job. You're always going to find something wrong. You're always going to find, no one's perfect. And that's okay. No one's going to get beat up or chop a head off over those things. Well, that has now transitioned into another thing that we're doing now, where about 65% of new police chiefs and new sheriffs come from outside the agency. So you've just taken over a new agency. What'd you just inherit?
All their problems.
Do you know what they are? Are they going to tell you what they are? Or do you want to hire me to come in with the team, spend a day or two there, do all the things that I just talked about? Now you've got an independent person who's coming in to say, okay, these are problems. You're now aware of them. You can basically have a disclaimer to say, hey, that was stuff that happened before I got here. But after a year, if you've been there a year, you now own the problem. So if you're not addressing it, and a year later you find out about it because you buried it and never looked at it, you own it. So we get calls from agencies saying, hey, I just got this thing. Can you come over, spend 2 days, 3 days, go through my stuff, look at my stuff, look at our stuff, give us some recommendations of what we can do, what we can improve, how we can make these things happen. We did an agency recently that the new chief came in, and their post-compliance, California says 24 hours every 24 months, plus you have to have a perishable skills. 31% of the agency was in compliance.
Wow.
Which was up. 29%
the previous year?
The previous training cycle. Post-training cycle is 2 years. So for the last 4 years, less than a third of their agencies in compliance. And then we looked at the perishable skills. Guess what they were not in compliance with? Use of force, firearms, and verbal and de-escalation, tactical communications. What are the ones that you're going to get nailed on in your lawsuit? Right? Those three. And it's like, and then they bring up your profile and say, look at what you've done or what you haven't done. This is huge. These are big things. You had one where it was use of force. Asked the agency, you got any use of forces? Nope. We haven't had any in a couple of years. That happens. It's I at Cal State, no, granted it's a college campus, we had no use of forces for 3 years. We're fine. We're doing. So I get it. So we pull a bunch of arrest reports where subjects were emptied. First 3 were taser darts. That looks like a use of force to me. Well, come to find out that their policy was that if they did have a use of force, and if the supervisor who investigated it found out to be objectively reasonable, found it to be in policy, nobody looked at it above them. This sergeant had 3 uses of force, tased people, did his own investigation into his own use of force, and no one ever knew about it.
That's not a problem.
Now, as it turned out, it wasn't a problem in the sense that when we looked at the use of forces, we said, yeah, these are clean, these are good. But you see, Chief, where you could have a problem, and the chief's like, got it. I've got to make some changes. Cool. So it's an insurance policy. It's well worth having somebody come in and say, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's what you're doing. These are some shortcomings. Here's some recommendations on how to fix those things. And here's some things that your agency's doing well. I as a new chief, when I came into my agency, there were lots of problems that I didn't know about because the top tier guys are the guys that have been perpetuating the problems. And I'm not saying they're doing this to be malevolent or trying to be problematic. Sometimes they just don't know. Sometimes it's just, that's how we've always done it. That's just how we've done it. And I didn't realize how big of a problem this could be. We went to one agency where among the people who were out of compliance, different agency, was their training sergeant was not in compliance with post for 6 years. We had one where we had an agency where 4 of their 5 command officers had not qualified with a firearm in 3 years. Could that be a problem? If one of those, now, command officer get into a shooting, extremely rare. But still, is that going to be a problem? Plus, if you're beating up a deputy or an officer for not being in compliance, but your command folks aren't, what's the message you're sending? So, and the reason I share that is just to say, hey, if you need me, come get me. But what I'm saying is there's opportunities out there everywhere. Every time you turn around, there's somebody who says, hey, why are we doing this? Why are we looking at that? How can we do that? How can we make this better? And those are all opportunities. And you need to start thinking about that before you're ready to before you're filling out those retirement papers. So that's why I encourage everybody today that sees this podcast, as soon as you're finished looking at this podcast, break out your CV and start putting it together. And all of a sudden you're going to realize you've got a lot of experience, a lot of expertise in a lot of areas. Then it's like, okay, cool. Now I've got this. Do I want to do expert witness stuff? Do I want to be a consultant? Do I want to go get a job working for, pick the company, fill in the blank, because they're out there and they're looking for you. Same with, and I know I've been saying this as we've been talking about law enforcement stuff, but it's the same with the military. There's a lot of skill sets that you possess in the military, that you learned as part of your transition through your career, that can be easily downloaded and put into how is that going to relate to this. You look at some of the interesting leadership books that are out there, and I don't say leadership with air quotes to be facetious or to be demeaning, but if you look at some of the big ones that are big sellers, Jocko Willink, we all know who Jocko is, on extreme ownership. What's the book? It's 10, 12 chapters. Here's a concept that I learned. Here's a concept. Here's how it applied in the military. Here's how it applies in the private sector. That's a simple formula. All you're doing when you're going to go out for that job, when you're going to apply for that job in that place, is just that. So here's what I did in my other life. Here's how that makes me the person you want to hire in this job. This is why I'm qualified to do the job working for you, because I've got this experience and I've been able to do it in the real world here. And this is how easily that would transition into your environment. Boom. You just nailed that interview. And that's in your resume. How you're going to put that into your CV, not so much, but how you're going to put it in your cover letter, right? And again, here's newsflash. Most of us have never written a resume. Most of us have never written a cover letter. Most of us, a lot more of us, have not written a CV, because whether it's in the military, whether it's in law enforcement, the firefighting service, whatever, the civil service thing, it's a civil service test that they give you to say, are you ready to promote to the thing? And I'll remind you that a civil service exam is designed to eliminate candidates. It's not to see what you know and see. So look for the most archaic concept in the study material, and I guarantee you there's going to be a question on it, because they just want to get rid of people. They want to narrow that pool, that feeder pool. But what's going in there? So you've got this thing, you're taking this test, you're taking these exams, and you've never done it before. Right? Because everything's already built in for us. When I remember filling out my CV, doing the expert witness stuff. Now this was in 2005, so this was, 6 years before I retired. Actually, 2003 was my first one. 99, check that, 99. So this is 10 years before I retired. I'm doing a CV. Right. And because I'd never done one before. So I had to go online, and there wasn't a lot of stuff online in 1999. So I'm having to get books at the library, and I'm having to talk to people saying, hey, how would I do this? Put that CV together, put it together, and say, okay, now I've got this thing and I can update it and keep it updated. What is your plan for that interview, right? How do we do those things? We've never done them before. If I may, just a quick formula. So and I'm going to oversimplify it right now, but when they ask you a question in an interview, what I tell people is you want to have a format. So the format is, repeat back to them what is the issue in this question you just asked me. What's the issue? Second is, why is that issue important? Next is, what's my short-term strategy? What's my long-term strategy? And what's my feedback loop? So they ask you a question on community policing, right? So we talk about why community policing is important. And then they talk about, so here's the question. Basically, I rephrase the question for you and say, you're asking me why it's important to have a community policing thing. Now, that serves two purposes. One, it helps me reaffirm that I've got the right question. Secondly, it helps the panel understand, no, that's not what we asked. We're asking about this. What color were your socks today? Right? So that's rephrasing the question for them. Why is it important? Making sure you understand what's going on. Short-term strategy. What are you going to do right now to solve the problem? You've got a sexual harassment thing. the person says that, somebody grabbed her ass. Okay, fine. That's bad because it affects not only the morale of that individual, but it sets a tone for the agency, blah, 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 blah. That's why it's important, right? And now my short-term thing is we're going to stop it. Whatever happened, we're going to put a stop to it right now. Long-term strategy is we're going to educate, talk to people, remediate, get the training stuff, right? There's an old concept that if only one person's doing it, it's probably a training issue. If everybody's doing it, it's definitely a training. It's a systemic thing, right? So we want to make sure we're looking at those things. And then the feedback loop. I've just done something. I want to make sure it's working. So who's my feedback group? Well, my feedback loop is my subordinates. My feedback loop is my peers. My feedback loop is my bosses. My feedback may be community members to see what they think of this thing that I've done. And then you've answered the question. And the reason is I go back to an interview I did once. LAPD used to have something called core values. And they talked about the core values of the agency. And that was a question. So what are the core values? Or what's your favorite core value? Or what core value works out for this job or whatever? And I was asked the question, what are the core values? And for some reason, I'd answer this question a gazillion times, For some reason, this one, when she asked the question, it sounded different. And I said, are you asking me to name the core values? Or are you asking me what they are? She said, let me read the question to you. What are the core values? Okay, values are those guiding principles that we use for life. What's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad. Core values are those values that are so integral into our being that we can't exist without them. Reverence for life, reverence for, the law, whatever it is. That the Los Angeles Police Department has identified 5 values that it has deemed core values that are important to the agency, that the agency cannot survive without them. And those are boom, 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 boom. Well, I've just answered the same question that I usually would say, here's what the 5 core values are. But I've put a different spin on it. So what that does is that gives that panel the insight that what this is about. I'm not just answering the question. I'm not just answering the question saying sexual harassment's bad. I'm answering the question saying why it's bad and how that's going to impact morale and how that's going to impact this and how it's going to impact the economy and how it's going to impact funding for this problem and how it's going to. I'm letting them know that I know more about than just what the right answer is. And we don't do that a lot. I've sat on hundreds, thousands of interviews, whether from entry level all the way up through, promotions to the top tier. And it's the same stuff a lot of times. It's just they're answering the question and not giving the thought process to why that's important. So I understand that what you want to do in that interview is you want to set yourself apart from those other candidates. If they go through. So, and I'll give an example, a slightly different example. This was just for applying for a job. So I have a niece and nephew who, they're both Annapolis graduates. And
they both went to Annapolis?
Yeah, that's where they met. So she's a Marine. He's Navy.
Oh, so one's a nephew or niece-in-law.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So they decide, he gets reassigned. She's like, hey, now's be a good time to go reserve and be a mom. But she now wants to get a job. So she's going to go apply for something. I said, hey, what you need to do is you need to make a challenge coin. You're a Marine captain, Annapolis graduate. You can make a pretty cool coin. Now, coins cost, $4 or $5 a piece, depending on the quality. And you're going to buy a minimum of 100, so it's going to cost you $400 or $500 right at the chute. But when you go to that job fair, at the end of that day, when they walk back with a stack of resumes, they're going to have one coin, yours. And I guarantee you that they're going to look at that and go, okay, because it set you apart from everybody else that's applied for that job. And that's really what you want to do. You want to set yourself apart, hopefully for the better. But you don't want to be the guy that are going, oh gosh, who would hire that guy? But I remember when we were hiring for the mental illness unit, we had there was a hiring freeze, no promotions. We were allowed to promote one person to Detective 3, senior top level detective within the Los Angeles Police Department. We had 62 applicants, gave 43 interviews. And the first guy on the first day blew us out of the water. It was just, and I mean, literally when he walked out the door, we looked at each other and said, the bar has been set. And we sat through 3 more days of interviews and no one came close. No one, I mean, it wasn't even close. And so, you want to be that guy. You want to be, if you're not the first guy that can blow him out of the water, you want to be the last guy. But the problem with that is after 43 interviews, are they listening to what you're saying? Right. And so you have to, make sure that the board understands. And I remember guys, one time there was a guy who did a promotional interview, and you talk about high risk. He walked in, it was the last day of promotional interviews, it was for sergeant. They'd given, this panel had been there for a week and did, 8 to 10 a day so just there, for actually it was a 2-week process going through the interviews. And this guy walked in and he sat down and they said, would you like to make an opening statement? He said, yes, I would. And he stood up, he took out a stack of $20 bills out of his jacket and just said, let me know when I hit a 95. And then the board just stopped and he scoops it up, puts it back in his pocket. Okay, now that I have your attention, I've got some things I want to talk about why I'm qualified to be a sergeant in the Los Angeles Police Department. I know you guys have been heard, everybody's talking, but I wanted to make sure I had your full attention for this. They said, 95. There was another one who walked in and said, asked me, he wanted to make an open statement. He says, I believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, and I believe it's in his hands. And one of the panel members said, Lord Jesus Christ gave him a 73. It's just like, how do you set yourself apart? You want to set yourself apart as the good one, not the bad one, right? So we've not done those before. And when we walk into the interview, we usually know everybody that's on the board, and they, and it's a lot of times it's like, I don't need to explain what I do because you guys see me every day. So I don't need to tell you what I'm.
It's the worst thing you can think of when you're in an oral panel.
Well, exactly, because everybody else is walking in the door that they see every day. What's going to set you apart from the rest of the guys? What's going to set you apart from everybody else? And that's a big one for me. One of my early epiphanies was we had paper lock and affirmative action. Now, the affirmative action guidelines were that you take the best qualified applicant. And when you have people that are equally qualified, then you give consideration to achieving parity with the private sector. And a lot of folks said, affirmative action means they're going to go for the minority candidate or for the woman or for whomever. And I paid attention to what they said. So I knew that I always had to be the best. I had to put myself in that top slots so that if nobody else got up there, then it's mine. And if everybody else got up there, I was still going to be better than everybody else. I had to do that because otherwise I was not going to be, when it got done to the parity thing, it wasn't going to be me. And as a result, I was better at that. I made sure that I knew the questions. I knew what was going on. I knew those answers, and I knew how to respond and how to interact with the board. I've had a number of people say that one of the things I was good at was literally getting the other members of the board to play. I'd ask questions to them. I'd say, well, for example, sir, when you do this, or like in an interview for sergeant, they talked about you had to fill out a face sheet for a personnel complaint. Well, the term was we'd pencil it out, because I pencil it out means it's kind of a complaint, but it's not because you haven't signed off on it. So I would say I'd pencil it out because ultimately the decision on whether or not this is going to be a complaint rests with you, sir. I'm talking to the captain on the other side of that board. Well, now I'm involving them in my process, and more often than not, they would respond. They would make a comment. They would say something that I've got them, right? Now I've got that person in there. And so there's a whole skill set again, we could do an entire podcast just on interviewing skills. But these are things that you need to be thinking about. This is the first time you've done it. You're going in there, you're going to go for the real game, whether it's to another agency, because it's time to lateral out because you're done. You've drained everything you can get out of that agency, or it's drained everything from you that it's going to get from you. But it's okay. Either one of those is fine. You're going to go to another agency. Why should I hire you? I'm a chief of police. Why should I hire you to come work for my agency? There's always, you're always questioning, why are you leaving your other agency? I mean, I'm going to find out most of the time on the background. But sometimes it's just like, hey, I just need a change of pace. I just need to do something different. I'm tired of working in downtown Los Angeles or in Skid Row. I want to go work as, in Siskiyou County as a deputy, out with trees and with stuff that I can in a place where I can raise a family. I can't do that in downtown, in Los Angeles. Whatever that's going to be. What's going to set you apart from everybody else? Do you know what your skill set is? Do you know what's on that CV? Do you know what should be on that CV? So start today. Start building that CV today. Start looking at those things and then start figuring out what it is that you would think you would enjoy doing. And with the internet, there's lots of times to take a look at things. There's podcasts from people talking about, hey, here's what I do in this business. Here's what I do in that company. You say, okay, that's something I'd want to do. Or all of a sudden you go, ooh, I don't think I want to do that. That sounds too much like a sitting behind a desk and counting paper clips. California law enforcement. Look at all the stuff we've got here. You want to work the lottery? You want to work horse racing? I mean, those are actually sworn peace officer positions in the state of California. There's a lot of great stuff that you can do out here. Look at one agency I saw recently. One of the great one was San Diego Port Police. They're sworn. They're cops. They drive cars just like everybody else. Oh, they also drive boats. Oh, they're also get dual pay because they're firefighters, because they have the water cannons on their boats to be able to put out fires when a ship catches fire. Oh, they're also divers. They all get dive pay because they're all, so when you watch these guys, when they go out to get in their car, the guys go out of the car with a very small load. The guys who get on the boat are carrying out their tanks, their scuba gear, their firefighting gear, their, all their stuff, because that's the shift they're going to work. That's kind of cool. You get to go out and do a lot of different things. So you look at what is it you want to do in law enforcement? Crush crime, cheat death. Everybody's got it. But what are you going to do that's going to help you with your quality of life down the road? Those are some things I would just be thinking about for those people who are looking at law enforcement or transitioning into law enforcement or just even changing venues. Another job, right?
Well, I appreciate your time. You've definitely given a lot of gems of wisdom.
Well, hopefully we'll be happy to chat again sometime if you want. It's been great being here.
I appreciate you watching. But before you go, if you like the video, please hit that subscribe button. Also, any comments are appreciated. Thank you.